I want to welcome you to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our fancy warning graphic here. It says the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. We sometimes say that we might curse or drink an adult beverage to reinforce this concept. However, we normally never do. My name is Dave Beaty. I am one of your hosts. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a fresh illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of. Certain things like Justice League of America, Grifter, Batman Incorporated, a lot of other fun comic book projects. But enough about that. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks watching and also listening at home some of the fun things you've worked on as a creative professional.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Eric Alexander, also known as Bass God 14. That is not Bass God 14. That is Bass God 14, as in like a bass guitar. And I am the Chief Financial Officer of Bad Bob Productions, which is a small production company in Arizona. And I am also the Associate Producer of the feature film Occupants, which features Star Trek actor Robert Picardo and is currently available for free on Tubi.
Very cool. So again, because we're using our slightly augmented new format, we're going to start off by talking about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard. This would be episode 6. We're going to start off with our general impressions of the episode before kind of getting into some spoilerific discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have a fancy Picard graphic. I ran out of time. Oh, we'll use that one. But we're going to start by talking about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard. So tell me, Eric, what were your initial impressions of this episode of Picard?
General impressions. Well, I will say that I felt more positive about this episode than the last episode. That's not exactly a high bar to set, unfortunately, because the last episode was, I think, very controversial and had some pretty low points in Trek, honestly. But I do think that this episode was better, and I do think it actually holds up better than a lot of the other episodes in the series in general. I wouldn't necessarily put it up there exactly with episode 1, which I think we both agreed on is probably the best episode of the series so far. But it's kind of close. For the most part, I thought after the first act or so, I thought that it moved decently. There was some issues I had with the first act that I thought were just unnecessary and kind of made it drag. That's kind of some of the unevenness of the show overall, I think, is that there are parts of this episode, and there's part of this series in general, where you feel like things are being rushed, and then the next minute you feel like things are going on way too long. Like why are they taking so long to explain this very simple thing that's going on in the show? Why are they using quasi pseudo techno speak when it's not necessary? Why are they inventing new terms when it's not necessary? That was a big problem with episode 5, in my opinion, when they were trying to explain the heist, if you will, the con that they were doing. It was very straightforward, and they just took forever to explain it, and I was completely confused over a very straightforward plan. So there was some of that in this episode as well. But like I said, I thought once you got over the first act or so, it seemed like it picked up a lot. And there were parts that were going real fast and actually were holding my attention, and I was actually getting kind of excited about. So, and I can't say that about a lot of the rest of Picard, unfortunately. But I did have those moments in this one, particularly at the end. I thought that the ending was somewhat exciting and all that kind of stuff, that where I was kind of almost on the edge of my seat at the end of the episode. I still really dislike Raffi. I'm really going to get into it in our deep dive about my issue with her, and specifically in this episode that I think was a real low point, and could have been handled completely differently. But Rios seems okay. I think he got through the episode okay. The scientist girl, I think she's ruined. She was ruined by the previous episode, and she's literally like damaged goods now. And so I was not impressed with her character. For the first time, I think in this series, we had someone see Picard on screen for the first time, and they didn't treat him like he was a big jerk. We actually had a moment where someone was reintroduced to Picard and wasn't like, "You bastard, you did this and this," and this is the first time that's happened. We're on episode 6. We're over halfway in the series. And for the very first time, somebody actually treats Picard the way that the fans would treat Picard,
Right.
And that was a good moment. That's probably one of the reasons I actually like this episode. And so it was a good moment. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Hugh appears in this episode, and I think Hugh did a very good job. I think he's a high point. I think he is the only character so far, in my opinion, other than some moments with Picard himself, where I really felt that he was actually embodying the spirit of Trek. Right. Where the character was actually doing very Trek-like things. I think this is the first time I've seen that. So overall, I would say that my impression is pretty good, actually, of this episode. I do have some major issues in the first act, and I am going to get into them in the deep dive. But overall, I enjoyed it, and I see that Orville Nation is in the chat, and wanted to say thank you, PJ, for stopping by. You're always welcome on the show, by the way, PJ. If you ever want to come on the show, just let us know, because we'd love to hear from you. In fact, we have some news to give about you later when we start talking a little bit more about news from the channel itself. But PJ, you're always welcome to join in, and I'm sure you have a lot of opinions about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard as well. But yeah, overall, I would say that it's kind of more of kind of a high point in the series. At least I feel like the story is finally really moving. It's taken us, like I said, we're over the halfway point of the first season, and finally I feel like the story is really moving.
Wow, that light is really strong. Sorry, but I'm still messing with everything here, which I shouldn't be doing live on the show. So I wanted to mention too, I want to thank Orville Nation, PJ, for commenting. As always, well, at least for the time being right now, I want to mention that I want to thank everyone who comes into the comment and actually leaves a comment and kind of joins the discussion for the show. I like to encourage people to do that. So we had this. This is going to be the sketch card we give away during this episode. It's kind of unusual because it's Mighty Mouse. There's the artist proof thing there on the back, and it'll make more sense as we dive further into the episode. But I wanted to mention that real quickly, that we are still doing that with this episode. My impressions of Picard. Let's see. I liked this episode. I actually, there was a lot about this episode I enjoyed, quite a bit. No, yeah, I mean, it was fun. There was a lot of aspects of this that were fun. I enjoyed this episode. I'd have to say this is one of the better episodes for me. I wouldn't say this is the highlight of the series. I think episode 1 is still the highlight, but I quite enjoyed this episode. There was a couple things I didn't care for, but as we get into the deep dive, we can get further into that. But overall, I'd have to say this was an enjoyable episode of Picard for me personally, and that's my general impressions of of this episode. So
yeah, I'm definitely with you there. I think, especially with how it ended. I have some things I can nitpick, and I will. But overall, I do think it was an enjoyable episode. But I did have some issues with it, especially as I said in the first act. So you want to get into some spoilers here?
Yes, let's get into some spoilers.
Let me get my
Do you want to?
let me get my little spoiler alert here.
And then I did pull up a Picard graphic if you want to share my screen. It's not as fancy as we like to make them, but we got a Picard graphic. And I think this graphic, I selected it because it kind of sums up how I feel about well, this is my favorite part of the episode. We'll just leave it at that for sure. Do you want to get into just kind of giving us a quick synopsis of the high points of what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. Because this image happens very early. This is part of the teaser. So there's two parts to the teaser in this episode before we get to the credits. The first one is it appears to be a flashback of Soji as a child, and apparently she is dreaming. And the way that the dream goes is that she basically, it's like a stormy night. She's kind of like waking up. She's going down a hallway, and she goes into her father's lab, and basically her father seems to like chastise her or something along those lines. And then after her being chastised, she just wakes up. So it appears to be like some sort of flashback, a recurring dream that she has. And the next thing we get is sort of it's basically Picard kind of establishing what they're going to do, what they need to do in order to get Soji, because they know now that Soji is on the artifact on this Borg cube. So he's kind of saying, he's laying things out that we need to go, obviously, to the artifact because we need to find Soji. People are obviously concerned. And of course, Picard starts to get concerned. We have sort of like a kind of a PTSD kind of moment where Picard is kind of reflecting on his assimilation by the Borg. And that's kind of where we get this scene. Is Picard is kind of doing research. He actually does like search terms on his computer, essentially, for Borg, the artifact, and Hugh, because Hugh is the director of the Borg reclamation program. What's interesting is what's established also in this scene, or as they're talking about things, is that the Borg reclamation program is sort of like a sub-program within what the Romulans are doing, because technically the Romulans control the artifact. They're in possession of the cube. It's in their space. They're handling security. They're the ones that are basically harvesting the parts and selling them, presumably. But there is another independent program within this called the Borg Reclamation Program. And that's what Hugh is actually the director of. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. So they kind of established that this is sort of like almost like a Red Cross, you know what I mean? Like working within the Borg cube to rescue the Borg that they're harvesting the parts from, because the Romulans don't care about them, but Hugh is basically in charge of helping these people and sort of reintegrating them. So that's when we get this shot. There's a shot, obviously, where Picard is actually looking at an image of himself as Locutus from The Best of Both Worlds. And it was pretty cool because they actually interlaced the image on top of Picard's face, which I thought was really, really cool. I really like that. Obviously, it kind of gives you, as a hardcore Trekkie, myself, it kind of gives you like, goosebumps and everything like that, looking at that image. And then also Picard's reaction to that image, because it's very, very traumatic to him. And so I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that was done very well. can see the kind of image right here where he kind of basically interlaced his face, and it did a really good job. It looked really good.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
They got it like perfect where his face just interlaced right on that hollow screen. And I definitely think that was a really cool moment, a really cool moment in the episode. So that's how the teaser starts. Once we get past the teaser, this is where we start to get into territory that really was kind of the low point of the episode for me. I'm not pulling any punches anymore about how much I really dislike Raffi. I think that she's a terrible character. And what really kind of, I'll say it kind of infuriated me because the actress went on the Ready Room with Will Wheaton and said one of the big things that she's trying to accomplish, one of the things that she's so excited about, is she wanted to present sort of she wanted to present an image that people that struggle with addiction are not useless, that they have a place, and that there are many people that struggle with addiction, and she kind of wants to be like a champion of their cause. I'm paraphrasing what she said, but it was something that she said that was very important to her. And the way they treat her relapse in this episode is like a joke. And I predicted that, by the way. I don't know if you remember, but I predicted that we would get Raffi having a relapse. That was very obvious. You know what I mean? I predicted that on the last show. And the way that they treat her relapse is basically that she's like literally like drunk and high, and they decide that she needs to help them because they have to get credentials to get onto the artifact. In order to get on the Borg cube, they need diplomatic credentials. Now, how or why the hell Raffi would be good at this, I don't know. We were told that she's in Starfleet intelligence. That doesn't have anything to do with diplomatic papers or anything like that. In fact, the person she calls is a Starfleet officer. So it's like, this doesn't even make any sense. Shouldn't she be calling somebody like in the diplomatic corps? You know what I mean? Like an ambassador that she knows, which we could have had something like that. So even the continuity is terrible. It doesn't make sense within the world. So she's calling a friend in Starfleet, a friend who is, pretty much sick of her, just like everybody else is. And she goes through this whole little very convoluted spiel, and she's drunk and high. She's literally smoking and drinking as she's doing this. And she goes through this really silly spiel to kind of con the Starfleet officer into giving her diplomatic credentials for Picard. Okay. And I just thought the scene was so silly, so unrealistic, and it totally took me out of the world, especially when Patrick Stewart, and I'm saying Patrick Stewart, not Picard, gets up and claps for her. Because that was just like, that was such a bunch of actors on set moment. I mean, it really just took me out of the world for a second. It was just like, okay, that was terrible. That whole scene was silly. It was convoluted. You're totally minimizing the fact that this woman has now relapsed. Seemed to care. Nobody cared. It was just like a big joke to them. And then they're applauding her for her little scam that she did to get the Starfleet officer to give them the credentials. I thought it was terrible. I really thought it was terrible. And I think if you wanted to treat this subject with any kind of seriousness, what should have happened was she should have gone in there stumbling, drunk, high, practically incoherent, and she should have just screwed everything up. Because that's what happens when you relapse, That's what they should have shown. That's what they could have shown. It could have been a very deep moment to show what that kind of process is like, but instead they just made it a big joke. And she did fine. Even though she was drunk and high, she did fine. So that's the message of Trek. Hey, you can be high and you can be drunk. You can still do your job. No, it doesn't work like that, So that really kind of infuriated me because I felt like they took me out of the moment. And I also felt like in terms of what the actress has said, what her sort of goal has been and what she's trying to kind of accomplish with the role, I was like, this isn't good for that. This is not a good message to be putting out for people that have either dealt with addiction directly or loved ones or anything like that. you're creating a very unrealistic expectation that you can still do your job and still come out smelling roses when you're drunk and high, you know? So I hated that. I absolutely hated that. And I thought they kind of just glossed over this entire process when they could have really made it something interesting for Raffi's character. You know, they could have even had something where you could have waited. You could have Raffi still just acting fine. She doesn't have to relapse right away. Because a lot of times when people relapse, it's not the big event that makes them relapse. It's like a culmination of events, you know? So it's kind of like something really silly and obscure sets you off, not the fact that this big thing happened with her son. There's just so much to me that they could have done in that scene that they didn't do, and it just really took me out of it, and I really hated it. I really hated it. And I thought they made it into a joke. I really thought they made the whole process of addiction and relapse as a big joke. We do have a comment here from Clyde Neville, who is saying, "Good evening, Dave. Looking forward to more excitement." Because Eric goes into the depth of the show, has he considered writing his own show? And Clyde, yes, actually, I am involved in film production on an independent small level. And in fact, I actually have a proof of concept trailer that should be finishing up pretty soon. But hopefully I'll be able to share on the show and all that kind of stuff. I'm even working on a project right now with Dave that we're just we're very preliminary at this point, but hopefully we'll be announcing some news about that as well. So yes, Clyde, I am interested in film production. I am involved in film production, and actually in terms of writing, I have been working with my director on a script. So yeah, I definitely am into that sort of stuff and working on it. So we'll see how that goes, right? And then people can criticize me and go into all sorts of depth and say, hey, what about this? What about that? Well, that was a big plot inconsistency.
Right.
And Katie's back in the chat. We're always happy to see you, Katie. She said that scene disgusted me. Someone like Janeway, whom I admire, would have taken that bottle, poured it out, and thrown the vape pen on the ground and smashed it. Picard shouldn't have clapped. Thank you, Katie. That's exactly where I'm coming from. Why is everybody allowing this woman in front of them to just make a complete ass of herself with the bottle? I mean, it's one thing when you show up hungover, right, to work.
Right.
That's like one stage of it, right? There's one stage where you show up hungover to work. The other stage is you actually show up drunk to work. The last stage is you drink at work. You understand that? You know, that's the way that this kind of stuff works. And you can also insert, drug addiction the same way. You know, one day you come in, you're kind of hungover. Next day you come in wasted, and then the next thing you know, you're actually like shooting up at work. You know what I mean? Shooting up or smoking at work. So I thought that was treated really, really badly, really, really badly. And I can't say enough about how badly I think they treated that, and how they did not treat that situation with the seriousness that it should have been treated, especially again with the actress saying, "This is why I'm doing this." You know what I mean? This is why I'm so into the part, is so I can be sort of an advocate. Yeah, you're not an advocate. I'm sorry. That was TV BS. And it was not the way that things really work when it comes to addiction and all that kind of stuff. And you sent a terrible message. You sent a terrible message that you can still do your job drunk and high. That's a terrible message to send people. It's a terrible message to send people. Oh, thank you. So Clyde said, great, looking forward to your stuff. I am too. I'm anxious to see how it turns out. So when you're involved in a producing role, you have to let a lot of other people do things, and you kind of just have to let them do it, because my role is mostly as a producer. So my role is mostly in putting the pieces together and then letting other people work, and trying to get funding and things like that. So I'm looking forward to it too, Clyde. I'm hoping that it goes well. So that's kind of where I was there. And so did you have any feelings on that scene, Dave? I'm just curious. Did it upset you at all, like it upset me, or did you just kind of gloss over it?
It did bother me. It did bother me quite a bit. I don't understand why everyone was just kind of okay with it. I mean, I guess because it's not a Federation starship, they're kind of like, well, whatever. I don't know. I did think it was weird. I was going to try, in all honesty, I was going to try and focus on the more positive aspects of the show and the things that I really enjoyed, because I feel like that the show has a tendency to do some things that bother me. Displayed with the last episode. The tendency is to do, I guess they're in such a hurry to do things that normally you would not be allowed to do on quote unquote Star Trek, that they're kind of in a hurry to just stick it all in our face. So I thought it was unfortunate that they felt like they had to do that. I did, but like I said, there was other things about the show that I did enjoy. So yeah, but this scene did bother me. And I was going to mention, Clyde Neville actually works with the Prescott Valley Performing Arts, and he actually does a lot of stuff actually with live stage theatrical productions. So
that's
Clyde
awesome.
is also a creative professional himself. We've got a lot of amazing creative professionals coming in into the chat. It's one of the fun things about the show. But no, yeah, the scene did quite bother me. But I was going to try and focus on more of the things I enjoyed.
Yeah, well, so one thing I can say is I'm probably going to end this review on a positive note. I can finally say that, which is not always easy to say in Picard, but
right.
But I did want to get that house cleaning out of the way again, especially because the actress has gone on record as saying this is important to her, and this is like why she thinks why she likes the role, and I'm just like, you're really missing it right now. Katie had another comment. She said, "I'm currently watching The Offspring on hashtag All Star Trek," that's how I've first kind of started interacting with Katie, was from the hashtag All Star Trek. And this Picard is not the same. As a fan, it makes me unhappy in many aspects. Also, regarding sweaters all the time. Cisco, you betrayed your uniform. So good stuff. And I will put out a little shout out again to hashtag All Star Trek. That's a community online of people that will watch basically 5 episodes of Star Trek straight from the original series to Enterprise. Sometimes you can come in at any point. It's from the Heroes and Icons, which is a digital sub channel that you can get through cable or through an antenna, depending on where you live. And a lot of people, what they even do is they'll just find out what the schedule is, and they'll just be watching like on Netflix or CBS All Access, and they just follow along with the chat. And it's a fun way to, especially if you've seen a lot of these episodes a lot of times, it's a fun way to interact and kind of see it in a new way, because you have all these other fans coming in with their little ideas and inputs, and oh, well, that scene was silly, or this is the history of that scene. It's a fun hashtag. And it's usually very positive too, I would say, which sometimes you don't have, unfortunately, right now in Star Trek fandom. Sometimes people can get downright mean and personal. And here on this show, we try to never make it personal. We're talking about the show. We're talking about the actors. We're talking about the quality, that kind of stuff. We're not trying to insult anybody or dismiss anybody else's view. If you really like the show, we encourage you to chime in, and we would love to respond and talk to you and all that kind of stuff. And it's not like we're totally one way or the other where we hate the show. I think actually when we end this, by the time we end this review, we're probably going to be in a fairly good place, I think. But I'll always encourage you guys to come on and chat. Speaking of which, actually we actually have 2 additional guests that are ready to come on the show.
Awesome. Very cool.
Looks like we've got Ed Harris, and we also got PJ from Orville Nation. Let me get the banner down so we can see everybody.
Hey guys.
Very cool. Hey
PJ.
It's got a nice wall. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. Hey Ed, how's it going?
Not too bad.
Very cool.
I've got a face for radio, so you're going to see a nice little silhouette there of that.
Right. No, it's all good. It's all good. Very cool. Awesome. Well, this is really cool. I was just going to say real quick. I just want to say real quick again. Thank you to everyone who is commenting and basically in the live chat. Again, this will be the card that we'll be doing. This is the sketch card. This is original art. This is not a print. This is an artist proof. This is from Cartoon Classics. This is original art by me. So we're going to be doing a drawing towards the end of the show, and someone will win this original art sketch card. A lot of packages went out into the mail already. Some people have already received them. Mike Lombard was our big winner on the for signing up for the email newsletter, and that's in the mail to him. So enough about that. It's enough house cleaning. Let's get on with it. So awesome. So do you want to drive this crazy train here, Eric, or? Oh, we can't hear you. Can anyone hear me?
No, that was I muted my mic. Sorry about that. I was letting you talk, so I didn't cause any interference. I got to get better at that. So, but PJ, I assumed you saw the episode. Do you have any like general impressions as we're getting in the deep dive? But do you have any general impressions?
I did. Let me just say, nice to meet Ed, and I guess we just lost. And Dave, it's such a pleasure. I've been wanting to connect with Eric, but I've never been coincided with you, so it's a pleasure, Dave.
Oh, well, thank you. It's great to talk to you. Of course, I've interacted on your live stream shows over on Orville Nation. I got smacked down because someone hated my Space 1999 resolution.
You're never going to live that down,
idea.
Are you, man? You're just never going to live that down.
I have never letting that go. Anyone who knows me knows that I never let something go. So that's what I'm known for that. I don't know. It's not a good thing, but it's true. But no, I quite enjoyed when I get the chance to actually come on Orville Nation and chat with everyone during the live stream shows. It's a lot of fun.
And we do have Ed back. Ed, did you get a chance to actually see the episode, Star Trek Picard, episode 6, The Impossible Box?
I did. It was one of the best episodes I've ever watched.
There you go. Okay, so
I did that purposely just to be contrary. It didn't work out for me.
You got to commit to it. If you're going to be contrary, you got to commit. You know,
I'm committed to contrarily being contrary. I think that I try to not look at any commercials or I just look at it holistically as I'm watching it. I understand like there are lots of flaws, and I find lots of issues with this season, just like how it's so disjointed, the scene jumping, like arbitrary plot lines that just seem to appear out of nowhere, and then there's some obvious stuff. It just seems it doesn't seem to flow very well. But
yeah, I'd say that's a standard problem in the show. We were talking earlier before you came on. One of the issues that I've had is it's very uneven. There are times when you feel like things are going too fast, and then there's other times where it's dragging. You know what I mean? Where it's like this. You don't need to go into that much depth and explanation into this, because this is pretty straightforward. This is pretty straightforward stuff, And then there's other times we're just like, wait, what's going on? So I think that's one of the problems with the show is it does get uneven sometimes.
I completely agree. The profanity throws me off. That and Discovery.
Oh, totally. It takes me out of the world.
Yeah,
that's not Star Trek to me anymore. Now I feel like I'm just down the street at the supermarket or something.
Yeah, I mean, like it's something I want to be able to watch with my kids, and then all of a sudden it's like Phil, Floor, and Filth, to quote 70s Bill Cosby.
Yeah.
But
on Red Skirts, we like to use the term flarket, which I thought was hysterical because I just recently returned to Twitter, and apparently someone is using the term flarket for some kind of app service or something. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We made that up for Red Skirts. And someone is literally using flarket to name their app.
Like fire. It's a regular Katniss.
Cool. So PJ,
PJ, did You didn't really tell. So what are your kind of initial impressions of the episode?
So I've been progressively being turned off by the show. My personal opinion. So this is the only episode I've only watched once. Because I kind of wanted to disconnect. However, I will say this. I feel like we all know that episode 6 is kind of where Shaban was given the reins of the show.
Okay.
And I do feel there's something different about this episode a little bit. So I'm curious to see where 7, 8, 7, 8, 9, and 10 go. I thought it was okay. For me, it was, there were less things wrong with it than other episodes. It was all right. There was a few moments which I do feel were very Star Trek. I do feel like when Picard and Hugh when Hugh was showing Picard the Borgs that were being reclaimed, it felt Star Trek for a while there. So there were moments.
No, that was a real Trek moment. That was actually a real legit like Trek moment. That's very Trek. What Hugh is doing, his mission or whatever, that was very, very Trek.
So let me just say that from the moment that Picard saw Hugh and they kind of connected, and Hugh smiled and was happy to see Picard, and Picard was happy to see him, and those Borg were trying to help Picard. They weren't trying to hurt him. And they all kind of share that scar, that they all share a commonality. And from that moment on, I loved this episode. All that stuff where you saw what Hugh was doing. Now, let me mention, okay, I sure as heck hope that we don't have to watch the super, whatever it is, Vash, whatever they're called, torture Hugh in the next episode.
I think that's almost a given. I think that's almost a given. This is a preview, so I think that's almost a given.
That's where they're going to lose me big time.
Did you guys see the episode 7 leak from Japan?
No. I have not. I haven't seen the leak. I just saw the teaser, and then I saw the scene from the Ready Room that Will Wheaton's show.
Is it true that Japan in Japan they showed episode 7 instead of episode 6? And some people have actually done a review on episode 7.
Really?
True? I think I
haven't heard that. That's the first time I've heard that. So I wasn't aware of that. Just wanted to get back to the chat real quick. Katie had another comment, and I think it was off of what Ed, you were saying earlier. She says, I can't stand the profanity. If this was the first Trek series I watched, I would not be a fan. I could never imagine Janeway cursing. Hard pill to swallow as a fan who tries to remain optimistic. And I can tell you, because I follow Katie on Twitter, and Katie is like the most optimistic person in the universe. She always tries to say good things and nice things, and really tries to be like kind of a champion for Star Trek. And I know her favorite is Voyager. That's her favorite series, and she loves Janeway. She loves 7 of 9. But yeah, Katie, I agree with you. If this was the first Star Trek that I was watching, I would be completely turned off. I would just be like, this is just like everything else. I wouldn't necessarily see what was really distinctive about it. And she goes on to say, the Hugh hugging Picard was actually a moment started by Jonathan Del Arco, who is the actor who portrays Hugh. Says he wanted the greeting to be joyous and a hug. Leave it to the actors to know their characters. And this is true. I saw Jonathan Del Arco posted this. He said he came up with the idea for the hug. It was not in the script. And that should tell you something. She's absolutely correct, because he tweeted that. He said it was my idea to do the hug. That was not on the script. And this is the first time we see anybody being nice to Picard, when they first meet him. Nobody has been nice to Picard. They always keep telling him that he's a jerk. He screwed everything up. Even when he didn't really screw everything up. That they're mad at him for reasons that don't make any sense, just to be mad at him. But yeah, this was a good moment. And kudos to Jonathan Del Arco, the actor, for understanding this, for getting it, for being a fan, for actually being into this. Because I saw him talk at Star Trek Vegas last year, and he's into it. You know what I mean? And he gets it. And it's a good contribution, and good on him for doing that, for making that decision.
Absolutely.
That the writers didn't. The writers did not make that decision.
That was the moment where I smiled and I was just thinking, oh, thank God.
Hey, Katie's seen it. She said she saw the leaked episode, but no spoilers.
Man.
She's not going to be talking about. She said she saw it.
Well, the one saving grace I have to say is because they're on a Borg cube, and Hugh is part of the Borg reclamation, whatever they're calling it, project.
Yes.
If the Romulans decide to try to do something to him, I think Hugh does have some people that could probably come, hopefully, to save him. I'm hoping that we're not going to see a repeat of what happened with the last episode. I can't.
The Borg would help him, right? The former Borg would all help him.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm thinking.
Hope.
I'm thinking, yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. So,
but you know what? I would not put it past him to kill Hugh in the next episode. I would not put it past him that he will die a horrible death in the next episode. Because of what they did to Egypt.
All I could think of is with him interacting with everyone in the episode is how much I'd love for him to be a part of the crew moving forward. Like, Hugh be a part of the crew and like how awesome that would be. I mean, that would be really interesting. And it would be fun too, because Picard would definitely have someone in his corner. I don't know. This episode to me.
This is the good part. This is the good part because Hugh was like doing almost like the hero worship thing of Picard. He was treating him the way that fans treat Patrick Stewart. You know what I mean? Like he was like, hey man, only you would really get this. What we're doing here. You know what I mean? Because you're gonna get it. You're gonna understand this. What we're doing, trying to bring these former Borg, back. So it really was it's a high moment of the series, honestly, because we really haven't had anything like that in the series prior to this.
Yeah.
This is it, so, and it was a good moment. And I commend Jonathan DeArco for what he did and his contribution to this, because, I like it. I like his take on the character and the way that the character's matured and what he's doing, because he would understand. And it makes sense because, he was one of the first Borg to get his humanity back. So it makes a lot of sense. Also, Bobby is saying hi. Bobby has been a pretty loyal viewer of the show. Bobby says, "Good evening, everyone. This episode was a step in the right direction," and I agree with you. And I think it's all because of Jonathan.
Yeah,
frankly.
I do too.
I think it's Hugh. Hugh, I like Hugh. He did a good job. And I like his contribution to Star Trek right now.
The actor's also in good favor with CBS execs, which is a good thing, and that's why I don't think they're going to kill him off.
What would be neat if you can reach out to him, PJ, because I know PJ does a lot of shout outs. He does interviews. He did an interview with the actor who played Icheb, with Manu. Be neat if you could ever get Jonathan to come on your show or get him to do a shout out and see if he actually if he's interested in being on the Orville. Because I know you always ask a lot of Sci-Fi alum, and he gets them to answer. Like he got Gates McFadden to do a shout out, and she talked about, well, I haven't been approached, but I'm interested. Because he always asks like, hey, would you be on the Orville? So it's pretty cool. And if you ever have a chance to reach out to him, that would be neat to see what he says, if he would be interested in being the Orville, because I'm definitely on board with it right now, because I think he's a high point of the show right now for Picard. Probably the only real high point, honestly.
We'll work on it. And let me just say, Mr. Ed Harris, I love your work, and I thought your work in the Abyss was fantastic. So it's nice to meet you.
And I appreciate that. And I have a funny story to tell about that at some point in the future. It'll be funny to me.
So I'm going to mention Ed is actually, he's on the show tonight. He's going to be a contributing writer actually for our upcoming digital magazine. And he's actually on the show tonight to actually talk about basically one of the number one story we're going to hit in our pop culture news segment tonight.
And PJ is going to contribute. He's going to be our first featured content creator. We're going to be doing an interview with him in the e-zine. PJ has agreed to do that. So we're going to be doing an interview with PJ about Orville Nation. about his YouTube channel and what he's trying to accomplish and all that good stuff. He's going to be our first content creator, featured content creator. So for specifically for streaming and all that stuff. So we're looking forward to that with the e-zine. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And we're looking to have that out at the end of March, right? End of March is when
yes. That's going to be the goal. Everyone's kind of getting everything kind of together. I've contacted everyone who's going to be working on this first issue. Everyone's pretty much in place. So we're at the point now where people are getting their ideas together, figuring out how they're going to structure their stories, and kind of pulling it together. And then I'll be coordinating, doing a lot of layout. I'll be contributing some stuff, obviously, as well, to the publication too. So we should probably wrap up the review for Picard, and then we can get into all this other stuff.
Well, we have another comment from Katie. She said he was the best part of that episode. 100% agree with you, Katie. 100% agree. He is a genuine character, not forced like the others. I agree with you. These legacy characters, quote unquote, were probably brought on to bring in fans because the new characters wouldn't. That's exactly how I feel, Katie. I mean, that's exactly how I feel. And one of the concerns I have is that we do know that Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis are going to be in the next episode. That's apparently where Picard has gone, is to whatever colony that they're on. So I thought it's kind of weird too. Why aren't they on Earth? But whatever, maybe we'll find out. But my real concern is it's just going to be a kind of a throwaway cameo, that they are not going to be really relevant to the story in any way or anything like that. I do know from Jerry Ryan's interview on the Ready Room that she is coming back. She said she is going to come back this season. So she didn't die. There was some fan speculation that she died because, she was in that situation with the guards are kind of closing in on her and she was just literally in the middle of a room shooting with no cover or anything like that, which some people made a little fun of. But apparently she is coming back. She mentioned that in the Ready Room. Also in the Ready Room, Rod Roddenberry was in the Ready Room with Will Wheaton. Did any of you guys see this? Any of you guys watch the Ready Room?
I missed that one. No.
It was fascinating because I've wondered what Rod's involvement is as an executive producer of this show. And I'll be honest, the interview was a little difficult for me to watch because Will Wheaton was talking all about the legacy of Star Trek, the legacy of Gene Roddenberry, and what makes Trek Trek. And quite frankly, what he said was the same thing that I think most of us say, which is that it's about that optimistic view of the future. And that's really the core principle of Star Trek. And I kept feeling like, are one of you going to address the fact that Star Trek Picard is not that? You know what I mean? That it's not doing that. And how does that conversation go? And there was a little moment where Rod talked about sort of his involvement and the fact that basically they give him notes, they send him ideas, and then he makes comments about them. And his job essentially is to sort of look at that legacy. That's the way he kind of explained it, to look at that legacy and give comments like, well, that's not very Trek, that kind of a thing. And he kind of alluded to the fact that he did have some issues with, and it was very subtle, but he kind of alluded to the fact that he does have some issues with the way the characters interact with each other, and that they're not very Trek. And you can just kind of barely feel it, in what he's saying. And it's very telling. It kind of reminded me of the first interview with Shaban, where Shaban kind of just dropped out there that, you know what, they threw my draft away. My original pitch was thrown in the trash, even though that was the pitch that got Patrick Stewart on the show. So I do encourage you guys to watch the Ready Room with Will Wheaton, because sometimes they say things and you can kind of sense the double meaning of what they're saying. And it feels like they're letting something slip that maybe they really aren't supposed to, and it is interesting to watch. And Jerry Ryan was also on that episode as well. And
there's definitely reading between the lines when you're watching them sometimes. Yeah,
absolutely. There's body language. You can tell when somebody's feeling like a little uncomfortable with the question, all sorts of stuff like that. But I have to say, I actually kind of felt bad for Rod, because I felt like I felt like Will Wheaton was not kind of, recognizing the elephant in the room, that Picard really isn't those things. You know what I mean? And they were talking about all the kinds of things that all we fans talk about. And it was just like, that's not really in Picard though, And
Can I add, when you finish, can I add something, Eric? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We do have a couple more comments in the chat here. Clyde mentioned, says, I think your Facebook location will be a big win for your blog. Who exactly is that directed to? Is our Facebook location, or?
I think that might be directed towards me, just talking about that the Facebook page will be a big win overall for what we're doing. So, and I'd have to say I agree. The Facebook page for the show is where we get our most interaction. I think we get our most views. Over time, the views actually accumulate. And for example, like the big growth area, I think right now for us is actually ironically enough, the audio show again.
Right.
Since we switched over to the
Anchor.
Anchor, thank you. Since we switched over, which I should remember that they're a sponsor. Since we switched over to Anchor, we've had a lot more. I've noticed the show growing by leaps and bounds. The stats are way up from where they were before. We have lots of new people finding us. These are all good things. So yes, definitely right now the Facebook is the hub for what we're doing here with the Retro Rogues, but I don't think that's going to be the hub, moving forward. I think obviously, the website, the e-zine, the podcast, all these other things are going to continue to grow. And also, number two, the most important thing that's a big win for the show is all these wonderful people in here right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
That PJ's on here, the fact that Ed is on here, the wonderful commenters and the people who support and watch the show, like Katie and Bobby. That's the real win. The community that's slowly being built, that's the big win. That's what's important.
Absolutely. And Katie did say that Rod Roddenberry gave her hope. She said, Rod Roddenberry gave me hope. I just hope that I hope he's just not ignored all the time. That's the concern that I have is how much do they weigh his comments and things like that when he says, the way these characters are interacting is not very Trek. You know what I mean? I don't know how much they take what he says into consideration. She also said, taking a moment to comment how happy I was that I finally the word Janeway was mentioned when Jerry was interviewed. Again, leave it to the actors to know the history of their character, not the writers. And yeah, that's in reference to the Ready Room interview that Jerry Ryan did. She did specifically mention Janeway and the relationship that Seven and Janeway had. And she was talking about that in terms of trying to bring the character back and all that kind of stuff. And you would wish that would be like a line of dialogue somewhere in this. You know what I mean? Like some mention of Janeway. But honestly, it feels to me like Seven did not learn any of the lessons that Janeway taught her. She's kind of gone on a very dark path, and she's not really encouraging the angels of her nature right now. She's in a very dark place. She's basically on a blood feud, a vendetta, that kind of thing, and that's not exactly very Trek. It's certainly not the kind of things that Janeway was trying to impart to Seven. At least I don't think. I never took it that way.
Right. And I was just going to mention, if I could, to talk to Katie directly. The last episode, I talked about how shocked I was that when Icheb was going through what he was going through in the episode, I was shocked that the fact that the Starfleet didn't have a rescue operation looking for him, essentially. And when the rescue operation showed up, that it was just Seven by herself. I mean, I would have liked to have seen Janeway in that moment, with some other Federation security officers. Seven can still be part of the Fenris Rangers, but if she needed help or if Janeway knew that this was going on, in that moment, I felt like the two of them should have been there together, looking for Icheb. I just feel like that for Trek history, and for those of us who've watched all the shows and who love all the shows and love all these characters, I felt like it was a huge misstep not to have Janeway there with Seven. And then you don't have to show us that maybe Janeway isn't on the same page as Seven, thinking that the Fenris Rangers bases vigilantes is something that she can't support. That can always be a line of dialogue later on that explains why they're still not, they're not tight, currently. I don't know. I thought that was a huge misstep in that episode. But then again, I had problems with that whole opening sequence anyway. I didn't like having to see that, and I felt like that Starfleet would be looking for him. I just couldn't imagine he'd just be out there by himself going through that.
Well, the really sad part too is, in a way, it kind of reflects badly on Janeway, Chakotay, the entire Voyager crew. Really, it's like, well, where the hell were they when all this was going on? You know what I mean? Why aren't they helping out? I mean, Icheb was a member of the crew. He was the one that actually joined Starfleet. He was a Starfleet cadet while the show was still going. They were basically doing, an online course for him, and he actually joined Starfleet. They kill him in a Starfleet uniform, which, by the way, doesn't really make any sense because he was on leave. That's the kind of stuff where it's like, you're violating your own continuity right now. You said he was on leave. Why the hell is he in a Starfleet uniform when he's on leave helping the Fenris Rangers? That kind of stuff is just like, how did that get past everybody? But it's like, you can tell what they're doing is it's little TV tricks, because they're like, well, we want to establish that it's Icheb. We want to establish that he was a Starfleet officer, so let's put him in the uniform even though he's on leave. That's cool, right? Yeah. Nobody's going to notice that. I did. You know what I mean? And it takes me out of the world again, where I'm like, come on, that's a silly like TV thing. You guys aren't even following your own rules right now. So that I think we all agree that the whole Icheb thing is terrible. What they did to Icheb is awful.
If you look at the comments, I think Ronnie's comment kind of sums it up.
Despair and disappointment means Picard is being discussed. Oh, Ronnie. Yep, I think you've unfortunately hit the nail right on the head.
You guys know, have you heard as well that Manu, the actor who plays Icheb, has also been blacklisted from the conventions now?
Really? Yeah, I saw that on your interview.
It's crazy.
And there's a whole story there, and I do recommend people check out Orville Nation's interview with Manu, because they get into a lot of depth. He discusses some of the, I don't know if you would call it the feud or whatever that he was going on. A lot of it came down to a tweet that he did, and a lot of people just will not forgive him for this tweet, even though the person the tweet was directed at, which was Anthony Rapp, has forgiven him, which is really shows you how fandom gets completely insane. But yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, and I will say, justice for Icheb, you know what I mean? Because for me, that wasn't Icheb, because hey, Manu wasn't playing him, so that really wasn't Icheb as far as I'm concerned. I'll make that argument, Katie mentions, I will say, if this show makes it that Janeway and Seven had a falling out, I will be done. The Janeway Seven relationship was the one thing I loved in Voyager. If it is destroyed, I will be broken. And I totally understand this, Katie, because this is her favorite Star Trek. I know that from Katie's posts and stuff like that. Star Trek Voyager is her favorite. So I can totally understand that and relate to that. It's I don't know. In some ways, I think it's good they're not mentioning Janeway, because I feel like if they did mention Janeway, it's only going to be bad. It's going to be like, oh, well, she just left her. You know what I mean? And you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's not going to be necessarily a good thing if they did bring Janeway back, even in dialogue. It's going to like somehow reflect badly on her and her legacy. It says, I'm already heartbroken over the C7 issue. Eric, you probably know I'm a C7er. It breaks my heart to see the darkness of Seven. She didn't deserve it. She would have thrived on Earth. And I think a lot of fans feel like Seven, like I said earlier, Seven's in a really dark place. And I don't think that's what fans were hoping for her. they were hoping that Seven was going to be in a really good place by now. And I think a lot of fans are really upset at the fact that she's obviously in a very bad, broken kind of place right now. She also goes on, the writers should have made it that Seven's knowledge was used by Starfleet to fight the Borg. They would have treated her like she was gold, her knowledge and intelligence. Ambassador to the Borg. That's an interesting idea. I think that's an interesting idea if they had gone down that route.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I guess that's my biggest surprise is and a bit of a shock is just how all alone Seven is. You know, because even though we mentioned it before, I know Eric, you keep calling out the Lone Ranger idea, but it's just kind of to me it seems sad and unfortunate that even though they're called the Fenris Rangers, so far it's just a Fenris Ranger of one. She's in a solitary ship by herself. She's trying to save Icheb by herself. When she's trying to help out Picard's motley crew on board that ship, which I don't think has a name, she's basically by herself. And I just feel like that's unfortunate.
The ship is called
more than one. Go ahead, PJ. Sorry.
I was just going to say that the ship is called La Sirena.
Oh, okay.
La Sirena, the mermaid in Spanish.
Oh, okay, cool.
If I could just add one thing to what Eric was saying before, I just want to. It's interesting that all the actors, or a lot of the Star Trek actors, are walking this very fine line because they're all eager to work. They would love to be on the show, but they don't. At the same time, they don't want to critique. They don't want to critique anything that they see wrong because they want to be on the show. They want to be back in the Star Trek universe.
No, oh yeah, well, I don't ever fault the actors for wanting to work, and there are segments of the fandom that they will confuse the character with the actor. You should never do that. Actually, Manu had a good take on that, and he's very open in saying, "I'm not Icheb. I'm not as good as he is." You know what I mean? But he appreciates the fact that Icheb is different than him personally. That's what actors do. They act and they want to work. I understand that, and the fandom has to understand that even when they're disappointed and an actor makes a questionable decision or they feel like they quote unquote ruined the legacy of the character. We last week we had, or was it last week or the week before, we did the quote from Harrison Ford where somebody went up and asked him, hey, were you a Force ghost in the last Star Wars? His response was, I don't know what the fuck a Force ghost is. He's not a fan. He's an actor. You know what I mean? He's playing a character. So a lot of actors, that's their attitude, and they shouldn't be faulted for that. It's a job. They're not necessarily fans. That's very common, especially in the sci-fi genre, unfortunately, and in Trek. Most Trek actors are not fans. They're not, okay? And people have to realize that. So there is a disconnect there. Ronnie kind of mentioned, I think, along these lines, says that's true. He says you don't want your favorite character making a cameo in this. That hopefully this is all a game by Q, that would require intelligent writing. Ronnie, that's kind of what I was alluding to, is that, yeah, at this point, I feel like you almost don't want your favorite character in this. I did like Data. I did like the way they brought back Data. In fact, that to me is the high point of the series, is the very first scene with Data and Picard. I like that. I like Brent Spiner a lot. I like that he was in it. I like that he came back as Data. But I do think in a lot of ways, some of these legacies of the characters are being trampled on. They're being trampled on. And they're not in the places that we would have wanted them to be, the places that we hope them to be as fans, as people that watch these shows, that still watch these shows. It's a little shocking. It's a little shocking. And I think we're coming up like on the hour mark for this review, but so I'll let Katie have this last word, unless anybody else on the panel wants to chime in. But said, where the heck is Janeway, Chakotay, the Doctor, Paris, B'Elanna? Now, if the Voyager crew is the Fenris or Janeway is the head, I'll be hooked. I doubt it though. Seven shouldn't be alone. I don't think Janeway would be the head of the Fenris Rangers. Just I don't think it would fit her MO. The last we saw her was a nemesis, and she was an admiral. Now, would she still be an admiral now? I don't know. I don't know what they would do. Apparently Riker's not, that's going to be disappointing to me. It looks like Riker's not even in Starfleet anymore. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of goes back to what Ronnie was saying, and I don't know if you really want your favorite characters in this, because I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be good. Ronnie says it was all downhill from the first scene. I thought it was a beautiful one. I'm glad they didn't mess up the Data cameo at least, and I agree. I thought it was a beautiful scene. As a fan, I really love that scene. I have an emotional attachment to that scene.
I have one question for you guys. Does anybody think Laura is involved in this story?
Well, let me chime in, because Eric has been putting forth that theory, and but he also says that he feels like, and I'm speaking for you, Eric. I apologize, but he also has stated that he feels like that there's a possibility that that's not really going to be anything they do in this show. However, I hope that Laura is a part of the show. I would like for Laura to basically be somehow kind of behind a lot of what we're seeing. And that it's not just Maddox off by himself, but it's Maddox in league with Lore. And maybe that way Eric put forth the idea that maybe they use this similar kind of technology that they used to create Dodge and Soji, and maybe Lore has a more human persona. He's able to age. And then that way Brent Spiner could just come on and basically be Lore again, but they don't have to worry about doing the makeup and the contacts and the whole thing. And it kind of gives him an in and a way to be on the show, and maybe even be, if not the big bad, one of the major players in the background, kind of pulling the strings with a lot of what's happening.
Yeah, and as I've said, I think that would be so cool if they did that, but I don't think that's actually going to happen. I just think it would be cool if they did that. I think it would be a really neat twist if Soji and Dodge were the daughters of Lore and not the daughters of Data. It would make a lot more sense, because you assume that Maddox had access to Lore, that Lore was put in a box somewhere like B4. But I'm not really holding out hope of that theory being correct. And Ronnie did ask, because I think he's going off that comment that I made. He says, wait, hold up. Riker is not an admiral. I haven't watched episode 3. Ronnie, I'm going by the scenes that we've seen from the preview, because there was a preview at the end of the episode, and clearly Riker is in civilian attire. Troy is in civilian attire. We know from the end of this episode of The Impossible Box that it appears that Picard is going to some colony, and we can pretty much assume that colony is where Riker and Troy are at. That's why Picard is going there, to seek some sort of sanctuary with them. I will say one thing that I'm a little disappointed about is I was kind of happy to finally see kind of everybody together, because most of Picard is basically 2 tracks. You have the Soji, the Soji track and the Picard track. So you have what Picard is doing, and then you have what's going on with Soji and the Romulan. And finally to see them together, I'm like, okay, now the story is really moving. Now we can really go forward with this story, and it can start to get interesting. It kind of disappointed me that they're separating again. So Picard is with Soji, but the crew got left behind. So the crew still has to deal with whatever they're going to deal with, the repercussions. We had the scene with Elnor. Elnor is sitting there with Hugh.
Right.
I was kind of like, why didn't Elnor and Hugh just go through the portal with Soji and Picard? I don't understand that. What's the point? I mean, Hugh has definitely been found out. I mean, the guards are coming, so everybody knows what Hugh did. We can see in the preview that they're interrogating him. So I didn't quite understand that, why Elnor and Hugh didn't just go through the portal with Soji and Picard. That I thought was weird.
I gotta say, it bothers me a little bit, the whole thing about Elnor at the very end. he's confronting guys with his security team with lasers with his sword. I don't know. I think it's just one of those things that the people in production and writing have not thought through.
Yeah, the sword thing. We talked about the sword thing before, and I am a big non-fan of the sword thing because swords are very conspicuous. Okay, and the second you walk in any place in the sword, if you walk into a bar with a sword in modern times, okay, you attract a lot of attention, and they're going to call the police. Okay, that's exactly what would be happening in the future as well. Whether they have police or not, they're going to call some authority. They're going to be on guard. Anybody with a gun, anybody with a disruptor or a phaser is going to be ready to use that. And it's funny because even in the show, when we first saw Elnor use his weapon and he chopped off the former Romulan senator's head, the next guy was like, "Oh, well, screw this. I'm just going to shoot you." And he started reaching for his disruptor, and that's when they got beamed up. Even in the show, they kind of made fun of it. I say it was very close to being an Indiana Jones moment. And now it appears like Elnor's making this big stand with multiple Romulan security responding, and Tal Shiar, we assume, and he's gonna come out just smelling roses and he killed everybody, and I don't know. I don't understand it. I think it pushes the that suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, the Indiana Jones moment just comes to mind. I can just see that GIF of Indiana Jones.
Yeah. Cool.
Do we have any other thoughts on this last episode of Picard?
I was just going to say overall that, like I said, from the introduction of Hugh on, I like the episode. I'm hoping that we don't have to watch Hugh get tortured in the next episode, and that we continue on this forward trajectory, because I did enjoy the second half of the episode quite a bit. From the introduction of Hugh on, I was having a lot of fun and really enjoying what they were showing us. And it was really refreshing because the way Hugh was being with Picard and touring him through the Borg cube, and we were learning more about it. It was very interesting. It felt very Trek. And so overall, I'd say, like I said, this is one of the better episodes. And I'm hoping that the next episode will hopefully continue that trend. That's my last bit I've got to say about this episode 6. Was it the Impossible Box?
Yeah, I think we're pretty much in agreement that Hugh is the highlight, and Hugh kind of makes the episode. I think he makes the episode. So,
yeah. Is that good? Are we ready to move on, or?
Yeah, I think
Go
so.
ahead.
We can move on to pop culture. And by the way, PJ, I know you kind of came on impromptu, so if you have to duck out, we understand, or anything like that. But we were going to do some pop culture news.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to say I have to jump off, but I want to say thanks again, Dave. It was so nice to meet you.
Nice to
I hope
meet you
you guys can come on the Orville Nation for an interview, and so I will be in touch. Ed, it was very nice to meet you. My pleasure.
You too, PJ.
So I'll let you guys continue. Thank you so much, Eric. Thanks for the invite, guys. Good night.
Oh, thanks for being on.
Joe.
We've talked about it quite a bit, and it's nice that you actually made it on, because I've been on PJ's channel, but he hasn't had a chance to come on ours yet. So that's awesome. And then don't forget, he's going to be our first featured content creator in our e-zine. So we definitely want to push that.
Oh, it's an honor.
Yeah,
okay, I'll let you guys continue. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks,
cool.
PJ.
Thank you.
I cannot say enough good things about Orville Nation, and I really feel like PJ is a leader, sort of like in the YouTube streaming community, because he has all sorts of people as guests. I mean, people that don't even really have a whole lot of content. He's had them come on the show, and they can give their opinions and theories. I got a real wild theory from one of his subscribers about Picard early on that I thought was just really interesting. And I was kind of like, well, that's a good theory, but I don't think the writers are good enough to come up with your idea, So, but it's fun. It's a real community. Orville Nation has like a real community. They love anything sci-fi. Most Orville fans, I would say, are also Star Trek fans. Not all. I have actually interacted with some Orville fans that never watch Star Trek, which I think is interesting. But there's a lot of cross-pollination there.
Very cool. So if we're good to move on to pop culture, if you wouldn't mind sharing my screen just real quick. Okay, so we're going to segue over into pop culture news. We've got a lot of different kind of things to talk about in this particular segment. We're going to start off, actually, I want to introduce our guest, and then we'll get into our main story, or at least our lead story for tonight. Ed Harris is here. He's graciously agreed to contribute to the digital magazine we're going to be putting out later in the year. Ed is going to be our original comic book art collecting expert. Ed owns an amazing collection of original comic book art. He's very knowledgeable in terms of the original art scene. I have a few pieces in my collection, obviously, as a professional comic book artist. I'm a little versed in it, but I always enjoy my conversations and discussions with Ed when it comes to comic art collecting. And so if you're interested in getting into collecting original comic book art, or it's something that you're curious about, Ed's going to be contributing to the magazine and kind of helping to kind of point you in a direction and help illuminate all of us with this really, truly fascinating hobby. It's an interesting way to get into collecting art in general, and I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you can find a piece that connects with you, that's important for you personally, a favorite story that you've liked or a character that you love. It's always kind of fun to have a piece of original art that connects you even further with that thing that you love. So thank you, Ed, for being here on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Very cool. We're going to go ahead and get right into this news item here real quick. I'm going to pull it up here on my screen. So this is interesting. This broke a couple of days ago, and I thought it'd be really, really interesting to have Ed on the show to talk about it. So what we have here is this comes from justcollecting.com. And what it says is the first ever Flash Gordon comic strip is set to auction at Profiles in History. They've got an image here of the page. It says the first ever Flash Gordon comic strip was drawn by Alex Raymond in 1933, and it is heading to auction, having been rediscovered more than 80 years, I'm going to add, later. Raymond's original artwork for Flash Gordon #1 has been described as the greatest find in comic art history and could sell for more than $500,000 at Profiles in History next month. This vintage pencil and ink illustration signed by Alexander Raymond beside #1 in the lower left panel, and is also marked Flash Gordon page 1 by Alexander Raymond in the top margin. So Flash Gordon remains one of the most famous and influential works in science fiction history and inspired generations of artists and writers, including George Lucas, who of course created Star Wars, and Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek. So this is a very, very important piece of comic book history, art history, pop culture history. I was describing today that you have to think of Flash Gordon as the tributary from which, Star Wars and Star Trek and all these other things, they flow from Flash Gordon. So we've done quite a bit of coverage of Flash Gordon, actually, in the Studio Retro Retrospective show, reviewing both the original Filmation animated film as well as the Filmation animated series, both of which were enjoyable high points. The animated film possibly being one of the best of its kind, in my humble opinion. So tell me, Ed, had you heard about the fact that they're going to be auctioning basically the first ever Flash Gordon comic strip?
Honestly, I've had my nose buried in work for the last month or two, so I'm a little behind on what's going on in the comic art scene. But I did see the article, and I did read up on it at a couple different locations. I've actually got a relatively decent full res scan of it that I've looked at. It's very interesting, just to say the least. Just the panel transitions and stereotypes that are thrown in there for the time. It's a great piece. I'm surprised it's in such good condition, to be honest.
It's interesting too because I didn't get it. I scanned this article, but I didn't delve too deeply into it. But at one time, I had actually heard some rumor that when Al Williamson took over drawing the Flash Gordon comic strip, that King Features basically gave him a bunch of Alex Raymond original art that basically they felt like they had no use for, and a lot of actually original Flash Gordon art at one time was actually in Al Williamson's collection. And I've heard that rumor from a couple different people over the years, but I've never had it substantiated that it was actually true. But this is an amazing find. So tell me, as an original comic art collector, do you think that the estimate that they're giving sounds about right? Do you think it could maybe go for $500,000? I mean, I see the significance and the importance of it, but to me that seems like it might be a little high, or maybe I am misguided.
I think it's all perspective. I mean, like that Fritz the Cat Crumb piece was 1.2 million, I think. There was a Frazetta that went for a ridiculous amount of money several months ago as well. I think there are some deep pockets in the collecting community, some very, very non-public purchasers. Like, I don't know anybody who's just laying around with $500,000 that can throw at this, but it is the first strip. It is in good condition. It's fully intact and it's signed. I think the only possible negative that might impact this is just, stock market in general is down right now.
That's true.
So, depending on, how timid people are, but it might be a good opportunity for somebody to pick up something because other people will be timid in trying to purchase. I'm trying to think how I can explain this. Flash Gordon was originally geared towards like kind of a competing market with Buck Rogers.
Yeah.
So Buck Rogers had come out maybe like, I want to say 5 or 6 years earlier. And it's definitely interesting. I think it went till 2003 or 2006, so it definitely had the longevity of a comic strip. You don't really see a lot of Buck Rogers. I mean, I grew up in the 80s watching, like Gil Gerard and, Miss Gray.
Yes.
Bitty.
Yep.
But I didn't have the historic exposure to like some of these comic strips. I find now that I'm in my 40s, I'm purposeful cough there. So I'm looking at older historic pieces. So like I read a lot of old Dick Tracy. I read a lot of Winsor McKay. I read a lot of just old strips, like all the old Superman strips, just like the cartoon stuff. It was a simpler time, and it's not as complex when it comes to the visuals, but the visuals that are there are super, they're detailed. I mean, if you look at I think it's like the seventh panel there, second row down, the biplane.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just looking at that plane, it it looks so much smaller than it probably is. But you've got like all that, like the flash coming off there, and then the line work, and then the panel right before that where you can see where they're talking about Buck Rogers and how he's a Yale graduate and world champion polo player. Just the ridiculous detail like that gets thrown into that. But I also want to know what airline that is, because those are some roomy seats.
Yes, that's true.
The last time I remember, I think you could have fit like 6 people in that space right there.
Right, that's true. It was a different time. It was definitely a different time. So
we've got a longtime fan of mine and a longtime fan of hers. Micah's on Facebook. Hi, Micah. And then, but yeah, I really think this is probably going to at least fetch $500,000. I'd be surprised if it doesn't. I mean, Crumb is one thing, Frazetta is one thing, but this is a very, very old piece of art. I mean, it's what, 86, 87 years old. So, I mean, it's something that you could proudly display on your wall because it's not offensive. It's definitely a periodic piece. Lots of great detail in the art and the story. Like, you know, it moves along pretty fast because back then they just wanted to capture your attention and get you moving on. And like, you know, in the 1930s, you had Great Depression, and then you have people who are just like looking to just get out of their system, and like space and everything was such a prevalent concept.
Yeah.
So I think
it's interesting too, because actually looking at this piece, I can see I am influenced by a lot of the classic illustrators and comic book artists. And I was just noting, because I mentioned earlier, people who comment, thank you for commenting, and you're being entered into a drawing to possibly win this original art sketch card. And what's interesting is I was looking at the backgrounds and how they're handled, and you can see I was doing something similar with the feathering and the kind of light effect actually in the background of this card. And I learned this kind of look, this kind of explosive effect from a lot of these classic comic strips. And you can actually see several examples in this Alex Raymond original. It's all right there. So
I also think that the perspectives are a lot different than you find in modern comics. A lot of modern comics are geared towards just, you know, big splash pages and like, you know, upfront, like kind of bombastic imagery. And here you've got a lot of subtlety. I mean, there's some action, like in the bottom left panel, like where they're parachuting out, and well, not the bottom left, but the third row down. They're parachuting out, the plane's crashing. Above there, you've got the scientist who's got his giant telescope in the background with a light, and just, I mean, the detail alone is phenomenal for such of the time, because, you know, I feel like the angles are just so much more realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could walk up on the scene where he's pulling the parachute.
Yeah.
And you could actually, I think that's something you could actually see in real life. You could see, you know, the Arab in the middle of the desert next to his camel, which has got to be a really short camel.
Right.
I mean, I know he's on his knees, but either that's a really tall guy or a really short camel, because they're both on their knees.
Yeah.
But it gives you the idea, like you can just see, I can feel like you could actually be there. And with the fact you've got the newspaper component, you've got the action component, you've got science, you've got the social commentary, the religious commentary, because the first 2 or 3 panels there, it's all encompassing. It pulls you in. Even like for me, like if I read this maybe 10 years ago, I would have been like, this is pretty boring. But I understand the significance of it now, because I've gone back and I've read the historic, you know, not historic, but I've read things in the past.
Yeah. It's very interesting, and I thought it would be definitely something worth bringing up on the show. So tell me, Eric, how did you feel when I shared this news article with you about the very first Flash Gordon comic strip actually coming up for auction?
Well, it's pretty cool. It's definitely pretty cool. Obviously, this character has influenced so much science fiction. I have a little image here of one of the first screen adaptions of this particular work. See that there?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
This is, of course, Captain Proton, which obviously was inspired by Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers from Star Trek Voyager. But my point is that the influence of the character looms large in all science fiction, and there's just no denying that. I'm also a fan of the the 80s film quite a bit, so it's always been something that I really enjoyed. So but the historical significance of Flash Gordon to sci-fi can't be understated.
And there's a lot of art artistic importance and influence too when you talk about the emergence of Alex Raymond. Alex Raymond's work on Flash Gordon and also I think it was Rip Kirby. There's still a lot of creative professionals that consider these, high watershed, like important works still to this day. The storytelling alone in this one page is impressive. It is beyond just the character significance, the story significance in terms of its impact on science fiction. You have the emergence of one of the greatest comic artists who probably ever lived, and the artists who would come on later to work on Flash Gordon. People like Al Williamson, which, interesting enough, Al Williamson took over, was doing Flash Gordon. He eventually ended up doing a lot of stuff with Star Wars. It's interesting how all these things kind of circle back. Even with the image from Voyager there, it's just terribly interesting. So the importance of this particular page cannot be understated. And for those of you that are watching or possibly listening, now is the time to scour the internet and find high-res versions of this page and save them to your computer. There's a lot of interesting things to be learned from this page in terms of storytelling and technique and rendering. And there's a lot of really great high-res images of this page floating around on the internet. So even if you can't afford $500,000, you can definitely afford to right-click and save it to your computer and have it in your library to reference when you're creating comic book art. So I think that's probably good for this segment, unless, Ed, do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm very interested to see what happens at the end of this month. I wish there were a little bit of kind of pre-bidding so you can get some ideas of what's going to happen. But unfortunately with Profiles in History, it doesn't quite work that way. So they do a lot of great auctions with a lot of high-end pieces. So I can only imagine their clientele is going to be chomping at the bit to get their hands on this.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's I could definitely see that. And I wouldn't be surprised if the person or organization or institution that buys this doesn't use that opportunity, kind of as a kind of like a press publicity moment too. I wouldn't be surprised if someone doesn't use that as a, kind of like a publicity press kind of thing.
Right. Like if you're in some kind of like tech industry or some kind of aerodynamic industry, owning this and having it in your company, I don't want to say lobby, but somewhere maybe in your president's office, it could really stoke the fuel of your constituents, like your employees and people who want to invest in your company. So it's not necessarily a bad investment, no matter what.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome.
Speaking of which, if anybody wants to go in, say maybe 1/500th of this with me, we can figure out a sharing schedule and we can try and bid on this sometime. So
all right, I'm down. I'm down for that. I can afford that. I can't afford the $500,000.
I think I could live with having it for 1 week every 5 years.
Well, there you go. Maybe we could start some kind of weird, crowd-funded sharing campaign, so a group of fans can actually own the first ever Flash Gordon.
I think that would be epic.
I think it would. I have the feeling that by the time everything was said and done, it'd probably set some kind of Guinness Book of World Record too. If someone was able to pull that off, that'd be terribly interesting. Very cool. Very cool. So I think we're going to move on from that. Ed, if you need to go, I want to thank you for being here on the show. If you want to hang around and continue to comment on some of the news stories, that'd be a lot of fun. But if you got to go, I understand. I just want to thank you for coming on and lending us your expertise and commenting on this important piece of original comic book art.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to stick around and as long as I can, as long as my battery here will let me, and then we'll catch up on the next episode.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So Eric, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, like I said, you can't really overstate the significance of Flash Gordon to science fiction history. That's the main takeaway I want to put out there. So,
oh yeah, very cool. So if you want to move on to our next story, what do you have for this episode?
I actually have a little bit of like an exclusive here I actually
very
had
cool.
some interaction with a Star Trek actor online. Garrett, and it's Wong, right? It's pronounced Wong. In fact, I think he actually gets angry if you call him Wang. But it's Garrett Wong. He played Harry Kim on Star Trek Voyager. For people that aren't aware, right now they're actually doing the Star Trek cruise, which is, I guess, a little bit of odd timing considering some of the other things that are going on in the world right now. But there is this cruise, a Star Trek cruise going on right now. And one of the really interesting things that they are doing on this Star Trek cruise is that they are putting together a sort of What We Left Behind style documentary, but for Voyager. For people that are not familiar with what We Left Behind, that's a documentary that they did for Deep Space Nine. I own it. I got it. I actually got a copy from the late great Aaron Eisenberg at the last Star Trek Vegas, but I still haven't watched it. In large part because I want to watch it with Dave, or at least get Dave to watch it too, so we can review it on the show. So they are doing a documentary in that kind of style, apparently, at this cruise that they're having right now. And most of the cast, if not all of the Voyager cast, is on this cruise. And I was able to interact with Garrett online a little bit. And as you can see here, I just kind of straight up asked him, so you're doing the documentary? People want to know. And his response was a simple yes. He is involved in the documentary. Apparently, as I understand it, it is being shot right now on that cruise because most, if not all, of the Voyager cast members are on that cruise. I think the only one I know for sure isn't there, I think, is Kes, the actress who played Kes. I don't think she's there. Which actually, to be honest, I would kind of like to hear her dish some dirt about the whole situation of her leaving the show, because that is a controversy in Voyager about how that really went down when Jerry Ryan was added as 7 of 9 and Kes left. I honestly don't. I've never quite understood why she left. If she was forced out, if she had other issues going on, or anything like that. I would love to hear from her. I don't know if she's going to be included in the documentary or not, but I think everybody else is, and I think everybody else is there on the cruise right now. So that we should be getting some interviews about that. I know that there's a lot of Voyager fans out there, especially there's a lot of interest because of Jerry Ryan's appearance on Picard. There's a lot of interest right now in Voyager. So I thought I would just kind of put that out there.
Interesting. That's very cool. I'm glad to hear that. I would be very curious to see that documentary. I actually want to see the one about Deep Space Nine. I'm a big Deep Space Nine fan. All of this stuff sounds terribly interesting to me. I always like when the original actors can be brought on, whether they're reprising the role or they have a commentary. I love all the. I mean, I guess it's kind of going away with the digital revolution. But I always loved all the behind the scenes, making of type stuff that they would do for DVD releases of television shows and movies. Two of the best still, in my opinion. There's actually quite a few. There's actually wonderful Alex Toth, talking about original comic art again, Alex Toth documentary that's actually on the Space Ghost and Dino Boy DVD collection, a really wonderful documentary on Alex Toth, the gentleman that actually designed Space Ghost and tremendous comic artist and important legendary creator. But then there's also there's a really interesting one actually about the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie that's terribly interesting if you want to see how things can go sideways and not go as planned and all the strange things that sometimes they obsess about in Hollywood. That one is really interesting just to see all the craziness that went on when they were making that Daredevil film. And then still to this day, I think one of the best too is actually in each one, there's a different documentary segment that came with the Alien collection. And it's a super, super mega deep dive, going back to Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett and how they came up with the story and how it was inspired by Dark Star and just all this interesting stuff that eventually gets you the original Alien film. They go into, of course, Aliens, Alien 3, such on and so forth. as well as talking about the Alien 3 that was supposed to be, that was thrown away, that eventually became the Alien 3 that we know. That stuff is terribly interesting. So I love any of this kind of content. I find it really, really fun. So I'm excited to hear that they're doing one for Voyager. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, I hope it comes out well. I guess time will tell, but I know there's a lot of fans that are interested in it.
Very cool. Very cool. Are we good to move on to another story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So if you wouldn't mind sharing my screen, this kind of thing is currently breaking and affecting the world, so I thought we should bring it up.
I saw this too, by the way.
So I have an even further commentary beyond just this, but it says the Baby Yoda toy production could be derailed by coronavirus. This has actually come from CNN Business. If we scroll down here, it says Hasbro, the maker of several Star Wars Baby Yoda toys set to hit stores later this year, confirmed last week that its supply chain is being disrupted by the coronavirus outbreak. That obviously makes sense. Coronavirus disruptions haven't hurt production of Baby Yoda toys yet, but according to industry expert Jim Silver, CEO of Toys, Tots, Pets, and More, a toy industry review website, Silver said he spoke with sources inside the Chinese factories that Hasbro works with. But Silver said the situation could soon change for the worst, but not just for Baby Yoda. If things aren't normal by the time June or July roll around, there will be a shortage on a litany of toys, Silver told CNN Business. Obviously, you can go to CNN Business. You can read further up on this. You can watch a little video package they put together here for this story. I thought it was interesting and worth mentioning on the show, the fascination we have here on the show with Baby Yoda in general. And beyond that, Ed, our previous guest, and I were having a conversation via text talking about how there's some stuff going on with Emerald City Comic Con. The organizers of Emerald City Comic Con did decide actually to issue refunds for people who do not want to go to the convention, who are concerned about what's happening. But beyond that, prior to that, basically all the major companies had pulled out and they were no longer sending any guests or representatives. They had no intention of being there, but the convention organizers were still going to continue to push through. And we were discussing how this coronavirus thing, as it continues to move forward, if with what's happening with the misinformation and everything that's going on with it, unless they somehow can get this thing under control and figure out how to approach it, beyond how it's going to unfortunately probably affect a lot of us with our working lives and personal lives, it's interesting to think about the larger reaching implications of how this could not just affect, is going to affect Emerald City Comic Con at this point, or production of, for example, the Baby Yoda toys or toys in general, such as my beloved Funko Pops, which I was going to talk about briefly tonight as well, but also how it could affect San Diego Comic-Con. And depending upon how it affects San Diego Comic-Con, how that could affect, for example, ironically enough, channels such as ours, where we're talking about pop culture news and what kind of announcements may just be made online. Maybe there won't be as many professionals there to talk up the movies and the TV shows. It's an interesting thing to consider how far-reaching the implications and impact of the coronavirus is going to have actually on pop culture as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll tell you this, smart people, successful people, they navigate a crisis and they prosper during a crisis. So here's a pitch to you. Maybe we should have a virtual convention if things get bad, something like that. You know what I mean? That's just right off the top of my head. That we were talking a little bit about this off mic. And the thing is like, for me, because I think a lot of people right now are distracted, and rightfully so, about this issue because, they're concerned, and I get the concerns. But in this virtual space, we can interact with each other without putting ourselves in danger. You know what I mean? Where we're not going to be exposing ourselves to any germs or anything like that. So, if something like that happens, maybe you and I pick up the slack. You know what I mean? And maybe we have some guests on, and maybe we talk about this stuff in a virtual format. You've got to adjust to what's going on. You know what I mean? You can't lose your head. You can't just be doom and gloom. People are going to need distraction, especially in a situation like this. People are going to want it. So, and that goes for anybody out there that's creating content or wants to create content. Think about that. because this literally is a safe space when it comes to that. You're not going to get corona from me sitting in my house over the internet, So, think about that. I think that's, even when things are bad, there are opportunities, folks. There really are. So look on the bright side. Try to look on the bright side, because that's the thing, is there's a lot of panic and a lot of paranoia right now. But again, smart people, successful people, not only do they navigate a crisis, they will prosper during a crisis. And you have to really think about that. We have a comment from Ronnie, and he says, well, I mean, the new Bond movie was pushed back to November due to the coronavirus as well. It's heavily affecting pop culture, and yes, a virtual convention would be great. So we have one endorsement on my virtual convention idea. So, and I did not know about Bond. Thank you, Ronnie, because I did not know Bond was actually delayed, or is being delayed as a direct result of this. I hadn't heard that. So that's an interesting bit of news too. And by the way, this is also a very good format for people to exchange information. Just saying, you know what I mean? This is a great way that people get information, because quite frankly, we talk, Dave and I have said that we want to keep politics out of the show, but this is a nonpartisan statement. You can't always trust what your government is saying. So, sometimes the best way to get information is from somebody, boots on the ground. Reach out to somebody that's, closer to where things are happening, and ask them what's going on, and this is a format. And with the internet, that's one of the nice things about it. As much disinformation that comes out, and as much, paranoia that comes out, you can also get good information. You can also listen to people and talk to people that are there and ask them what's going on,
Very true. Very true. So do you have another pop culture story for tonight?
Let me see here. I had one that was actually kind of like breaking news. So I don't know if you've seen this. So I definitely want to address this. Because we do a lot of Batman coverage, and we've been told we need to do more Batman coverage. So this is from Matt Reeves, the director of the Batman. Have you seen the Batmobile?
No, I have not seen any of these images. Huh.
All right. Well, here you go. So we'll get your sort of live reaction. That's it. That you can see Batman right there. And these are from Matt Reeves, the director of the Batman. This is the new Batmobile. You can see it there from a clearer angle there. You can also see the back of it with the lights, which it looks like the back of it is, just from my impression, that's the most interesting part of it. I'll be honest, I'm underwhelmed.
Well, I understand that reaction, but let me harken back to what I think is interesting about this. Number one, I like the idea that it's kind of more of a muscle car. But then number two, this harkens back actually to, they had said that they wanted this to be more a detective story, that they wanted it to be more in line with the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams interpretation of Batman, was how I heard some people talk about it based off the impressions they were getting from what Matt Reeves was saying. So what's interesting about this, and Ronnie's right, it does remind me of the Superpowers Batmobile as well. But more importantly, what it reminds me of is actually the Batmobile that Batman was using actually in the 70s into the 80s during the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams run. And that was very much more a contemporary kind of a sports car with just a bat kind of shaped hood kind of thing going on with it. So from that standpoint, as an old school, long-term Batman fan, I think this is kind of interesting. But I could see how if you're used to things like the Tumbler, even the of course the '89 Batmobile, which is still one of my favorites, or even the '60s one, I could see where this seems like a radical departure from those more aesthetically interesting and more fantastical kind of designs.
It does kind of remind me a bit of the Superpowers Batmobile as well. But I'll be honest, I liked the Superpowers Batmobile, and I don't really like this one. I can't. I think it just looks too much like a normal car for me.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. I mentioned I do like the back, at least seems a little more blinged out, and it looks a little bit more interesting to me. You know, film is a visual medium, so it's important, you know, for the visuals to be appealing and interesting and all that stuff. I get a little bit of a Green Hornet vibe, also.
I could see that. Yep,
a little bit, but just not quite as cool. I mean, because I like the Green Hornet car better. That's the Black Beauty, I think, is what I can't remember what the
Black
Green
Beauty
Hornet car was called.
Yep, Black Beauty.
When you talk about muscle car, you know, that's what I think of. You know what I mean? And a car like that to me, this one, it's like, I don't know, it just looks a little too standard to me to really be the Batmobile. So I don't know. I know a lot of people actually hated the Tumbler, even though a lot of people who even love the Christopher Nolan films, they did not like the Tumbler at all. And I've actually seen some comments where people are like, well, at least it's better than the Tumbler. I didn't really have a problem with the Tumbler because I thought it made sense that Batman would have an armored vehicle like that, because, you know, if Batman was real, he probably couldn't go around in any kind of a standard vehicle. He would get caught. Right. He would have all sorts of issues. You know what I mean? So this one, it looks like, quite frankly, you know, I have a background in public safety, and I feel like I could catch him in this. You know what I mean? So, you know, it's like, I don't know. That's kind of my 2 cents, you know. I'm a little underwhelmed.
Well, here's my thing. The Tumbler harkens back to Dark Knight Returns, and that's the thing I love most of. And then number 2, the fact that they built that thing and it actually does a lot of the stuff that you see on screen, like for real. That's the most amazing thing about the Tumbler. As much as I love the '89 Batmobile, that was not a real practical, you know, vehicle, you know. But the Tumbler was amazing.
I do love that one, though. I do love the '89.
I love the '89 one too.
I mean, it's a visual medium, and that's very visually interesting. You know, it's a very visually interesting car. So,
and I do talking about Batman. If you don't mind, if let's see, I wanted to, if you don't mind, if you'll just focus on my screen for a second. So, well, just me, not my shared screen, if that's okay. All right, so just so everyone knows, my birthday was actually Monday, and I'm a very old dude now, it feels like, anymore. I don't want to get too far into that, but I've talked a lot about my love of these little silly little Funko Pop things, and I've talked about some of my recent acquisitions, and I wanted to show a couple things here real quick, if that's okay. I'm going to show you the culprit that started this, just real quickly. This right here, this is the Batman Forever one. The Val Kilmer one, and I got this one, and this is the one that triggered it because I'm a huge Batman Forever fan. And I thought this, and I've had this one for a little while, and that's kind of fun. But I wanted to show you that one because this is what started it. So that, you know, we shared on the show previously, they announced they're doing a lot of the movie characters, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I need to get those. So the next one that I managed to pick up, because I have the Keaton one too, but the next one I picked up, I actually picked up the George Clooney one. The Batman and Robin one, because I'm a completist, so I picked this one up. This one's kind of fun too. But here's the one I wanted.
Yes,
I know. But here's the 2 I wanted to get to, which segues into the Dark Knight Returns comment. I had mentioned to my wife that I was liking these, and I found this is an older released one. This is not a current one, and I thought this one was really cool. So this is Carrie Kelly Robin from Dark Knight Returns. My wife gave me this for my birthday. And I thought it was really cool. And at first I was like, well, this is really awesome. I said, but she needs someone to pal around with. Well, she also got me this one right here. So there's your Dark Knight Returns Batman. He's got his armored outfit for fighting Superman. And I thought this was really cool. So I wanted to share those since we were talking about Batman. I thought that was a perfect transition. So we can now get on with the show. But I just thought those were kind of fun.
I really like the Dark Knight ones. Those are cool.
I think they're fun.
I like that.
I think,
and I'm not a big Funko Pop guy, but I really like those Dark Knight ones. Those are nice pieces. Those are cool.
Cool. So, but I mean, overall, my general impressions of the Batmobile for the new Matt Reeves film, it kind of follows along with the suit. It's interesting. I'm not totally sold on it. But once we actually see it moving and doing things, maybe I'll feel differently about it. There might be some fun stuff they do with this one that we're not expecting. So we'll just have to wait and see. I do think in terms of practical, like what Batman would maybe actually use, I think the Tumbler is probably more on point. But for me personally, my favorite it's always it's really tough because I love the 60s one, but my favorite one is the 89 Batmobile. That's still my favorite of all the Batmobiles. So
the 60s one is iconic. I mean, there's
yeah,
just
it's
no doubt
classic.
about it.
It's classic.
It's absolutely iconic. You know, I do. This does kind of relate though, in kind of a circular way. I remember a story from Bob Kane when he actually went on the set for the first Batman serial. And I remember there's a story where he talked about how he was like, well, where's the Batmobile?
Oh yeah, he was totally underwhelmed.
And somebody on the set, one of the PAs or something like that said, it's over there, sir. And he's all like, what?
Yeah.
That's not the Batmobile, because it was just a regular car. So hey, maybe they're going for that, right? They're bringing it full circle,
I'm pretty sure they won't go quite that far because literally they were driving around in broad daylight, changing into their costumes in that car. And the other thing they had that really kind of made it mysterious was that when they were in their civilian identities, they drove around with the top down, and when they were Batman and Robin, they had the top up.
There you go. But I always remembered that story from Bob Kane. I thought it was a funny one where he's just like, he was very disappointed with his first Hollywood experience. And I think he was contrasting that to, the 89 Batman and what an awesome experience that was, because they treated Bob Kane kind of like a god when the Michael Keaton Batman came out. A lot of people had forgotten about Bob Kane, and he really played that up very well. He even had a rivalry with Stan Lee that Stan Lee will talk about where, Bob Kane did like a sort of neener, your Marvel stuff sucks, and look what they did for me. You know what I mean? Because at that time, Batman just blew away anything that Marvel had done in terms of film or television adaptations. So kind of cool story.
No, and you can see that rivalry in full force if you want to actually see it. If you go on YouTube, you can watch. They have a lot of the comic book greats videos actually on YouTube. Someone's uploaded them. You can watch all of them. If you watch the Bob Kane, and of course Stanley is the host of that. If you watch the Bob Kane one, you can see them kind of taking shots at each other in a kind of a friendly sort of a kind of way, and it's kind of fun. Of course, as history has worn on, both of them have sort of questionable skeletons in their closet. So
doesn't matter who you are or what you do. If you're a prominent person, there will be hit pieces on you. Nobody's perfect. You know what I mean? So I always take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt as well. Because
I do too, but I just point that out because some people would be like, "Oh, I can't believe you're recommending that people watch." Relax, just go watch it. It's fun.
Yeah.
And do you have another story for pop culture, or is that it?
I'm trying to see if there's one that I really wanted to get out there. I always try to have some backup stories and things like that, just in case,
I do have one more.
Okay, why don't you go with yours, and then I do have one more that I want to put out there because it's pretty significant Trek news, and a lot of people talk about it.
All right. So if you wouldn't mind sharing my screen. Okay, so this comes from Newsarama. We've kind of talked around this story a little bit, but this is coming from Newsarama. Jim Lee signals DC won't replace Dan DiDio and addresses major DC reboot rumors. So we talked the previous episode about the whole 5G thing that we were hearing about that was kind of circulating around. You can actually go to newsarama.com and actually read this story there. I'm just going to read just briefly a little bit of it. This is by Chris Arant and George Marston. We got a picture here of Jim, who at once upon a time was actually my boss. Says DC's now sole publisher and chief creative officer Jim Lee has indicated that DC won't replace former co-publisher Dan DiDio, who recently exited the company. Speaking at his personal spotlight panel during C2E2 2020, Lee told the audience, "There's continually new things going on, and I look at being sole publisher now and the team I'm working with, much more in the trenches now than ever before." Says, "We've been with Warner Brothers for decades," Lee elaborated. "The actual strategy for DC is to put publishing at center of what we do. It's the engine of all the movies, the TV shows, the cartoons. And so it's my intent going forward as the publisher to lean into the collective years of my team, meaning the experience they have. Lee also seemingly but vaguely addressed rumors about Marvel acquiring DC Publishing, which has made their way into some internet rumor circles of late, shooting down any chance of this. To address some of the stuff that is out there, there's rumors, speculation, Lee explained. I wouldn't put any credence into it. DC has been around for 85 years and will be around for another 85 years. I hope to be doing this panel in 85 years. Lee also spoke about the chances of DC's impending 5G initiative, that it would constitute yet another reboot, saying that it's not in the cards. It's hard to talk about things we haven't announced. The intention is to not do a line-wide reboot. Lee clarified, our focus in talking to editorial teams is to continue what we've done best: character-driven stories, pairing right creators and right characters, and developing characters that are inclusive and diverse. Anyhow, you can read more about that. There's a lot of different versions of this basic same story kind of circulating around, that Jim Lee at C2E2 is basically shooting down a lot of the rumors that we've heard. So you can read into that or take from that whatever you want. I still think that some of the theories I've heard that DC might just go heavy, full tilt into the licensing business, and actually license some of these characters out for other companies to publish, kind of like what Marvel's doing kind of on a soft launch side with IDW with Spider-Man. I could see that possibly coming to pass, but we'll see. I know I sent this to you, Eric. Did you have a chance to scan this article at all? What were your thoughts on it?
I didn't have a chance to actually read the article. I've been paying attention to what you've been saying and all that kind of stuff. But my initial reaction is that this sounds a little bit like Damage Control, and it sounds a little thin. You know what I mean? There's not a lot of meat to what he's saying here. It's not like he announced, well, this is our next project. This is what we're going to be doing now. You know what I mean? Or this is,
right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'd say the jury's still out as far as what exactly is going on. You know what I mean? And what the future of DC really is. Ronnie said that's what they do best, and I don't know exactly when he said that and what comment he was mentioning. Ronnie, if you want to clarify that, please.
I think he's referring to your comment about that it sounds like they're doing some damage control.
Well,
which was actually a very good Marvel series, I might add. Damage Control was a very fun series published by Marvel in the 80s. I'd highly recommend that version of Damage Control.
It says, at least he believes in what he's selling, even if it smells like BS. Well, that's my question. Does he believe in what he's selling? I don't know. I don't know Jim Lee personally, or anything like that. I don't claim any insider track. I mean, Dave, you worked at DC, so even if I don't know what kind of direct involvement you had with Jim, or if at the very least you were probably within a degree of separation from him, right? So,
well, here's the funny thing about Jim. Jim was my boss. At one time, he literally was signing my checks, which was really interesting. And you would have thought I would have had a chance to really meet him. I was basically within probably about 4 or 5 feet of him on a couple of different occasions, but I still actually didn't have the chance to actually meet him. So I've never really got a sense for who Jim is beyond the persona that he's put forth in interviews and stuff. I do think that Jim is a pretty earnest guy. And if they're telling him, this is what we're doing, this is what we need you to do, I do think he believes that, and he will go after it with the same kind of tenacity and drive that he's always displayed. I look at Jim as a bit of a pioneer in the independent creator space. I mean, if it hadn't been for Jim willing to jump ship, along, of course, obviously with Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld and Mark Silvestri and all the Jim Valentino and the guys that formed Image Comics, I don't know if the independent side of the comic industry would be flourishing in the way that it has. So I give Jim a lot of credo and a lot of credit for that. So I do think there's some earnestness to what he's saying. But time will tell in terms of like what DC's. Well, yeah, I got that, Ronnie. He's paid. Yeah, I know. But I'm just saying, I do think there's some earnestness to probably what he's saying. There's probably a little bit of spin in there too, but that's what happens when you're in a corporation. That's just
you also get lied to sometimes.
That's
you also
true.
Get lied to sometimes.
That's true.
So you can put on that good face. You're told that everything's fine. We're going to continue with this, and then the next thing you know, they pull it out from under you. You know what I mean?
That happens quite a bit. Very true.
They said his original comment was aimed at Jim Lee, saying that DC is the best of creating character-driven stories and pairing the right creators with the right characters. So, well, that's obviously going to be his take. I think he works for DC, so
right. I would agree with that to an extent. I'm not gonna argue with my brother too much about that. I would take some issue with some of that, just because I remember how hard that Scott and I were both lobbying to get him on Superman, and Scott would have been a tremendous Superman artist. He did some of the most powerful looking dudes in comics, and he did action like nobody's business. And the fact that Scott never had the chance to actually work on Superman in his career, and unfortunately is a huge misstep that DC didn't tap him to do that. And now, unfortunately, he's gone. So I'm not gonna say that they are the best at doing that. I'm saying that they do a pretty good job of that, but that's my own personal opinion. So, and we just recently, just for those who know, we actually just, I think it's been 7 years since Scott's been gone, and that happened in February. So those wounds are a little raw at the moment. So I apologize if I'm waxing a little too poetic. I just was reading that comment and thinking about how much effort we put into trying to lobby the editors to get Scott on Superman. I just think that was a huge missed opportunity. So
no, I mean that's something you were really involved with. So you should be. I mean, I think people want to hear some of those stories too. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
absolutely. And I can understand that being a raw subject and all that kind of stuff. But it's also great insight. It's also a great insight to how these companies really work.
Yeah.
Ronnie mentions he's truly missed. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. So that's going to be it for me for pop culture for tonight. We're looking at a really long episode.
This one's should go quick. This is my last news item. I'm going to streaming wars. This is just something that came out recently. This is a Bounding into Comics article. It says William Shatner explains while he will not return to Star Trek. So Star Trek icon William Shatner crushed hopes of the actor returning to the beloved franchise that made him a household name. A fan asked Shatner, now that they have the series Picard, #Picard, do you think they'll consider a series Kirk for you? Shatner responded, no. I think Kirk's story is well played out at this point. This is a direct quote from a Twitter exchange from William Shatner's official Twitter. As you can see, that's what he says. No, I think Kirk's story is pretty well played out at this point. In a follow-up tweet, Shatner also shot down the idea of him doing a cameo. As he notes, this isn't a new position he's taking. He has been consistent in not doing them at all. There was a push from J.J. Abrams when the 2009 reboot was in production, but that didn't go anywhere. And I do remember that story. That supposedly JJ was trying to get, Kirk, to have a cameo as, the older version of himself. And Shatner was like, nope, I don't do cameos. And so it says, this is from William Shatner's Twitter. What was any different about my statement on Kirk that I haven't said before? I don't do cameos. That one stretches back to 2008 and JJ. Kirk's story is well told out of any other captain's story. Kirk died in generations. What is really left? Adventures in the Ribbon. Talking about the Nexus. So I will say this. Just had to say this. I have to choose my words a little bit. Okay. I will say I don't think Shatner is being 100% genuine because he has advocated before for a return of Kirk There was specifically a line that he said many times because people would say back to him, well, but you're dead. And his response used to be, but it's science fiction. You can always bring people back in science fiction. He used to say that a lot because he did have some interest in reprising the role. One of the latest comments I remember him having, and it was in regards to when Picard was greenlit, was he did talk about his age and the fact that there was basically no way he could do a show like Patrick Stewart again, to come back in that way. And there was some talk about maybe him coming back in a more limited capacity in some way. And it did seem like he was interested. So it hasn't been 100% consistent. He is almost 90 years old now. Okay, so I think it has a lot more to do with that than this sort of idea that this has just been his attitude all along. Because I think he did have some interest in reprising the role. And my speculation would be that he's just getting on in years, and he can't maintain the level of activity that he used to be able to maintain.
Right.
That's just common sense, So, and I think also maybe he's kind of come to the realization the only way he would come back, as far as from the producer's perspective, is as a cameo. And to his credit, I agree with that 100%. That's my concern with Star Trek Picard and the legacy characters, is that they become nothing more than cameos, that they're irrelevant, and you actually do damage to the character,
Right.
And so, to his credit, he's saying, I don't want to do that. Now, my personal fan opinion is I am not a big fan of Generations, and that's in particular because I was not a big fan of the way Kirk died. So I am among many Trekkies who do wish Kirk could come back and have sort of a better death, even if that's the way we want to go. Or we could just leave him in a good place. That would be nice too. Doesn't have to die, They did that with Spock to some extent in the JJ films. Although I know later, I guess they decided to say, yeah, he did die. I don't know why you had to do that. You could have just let Spock Prime, quote unquote, just live forever. Just you don't see him anymore, But it is what it is. I think Spock, especially Leonard Nimoy, had sort of a more graceful end to the character, a lot of tributes and things like that than Kirk did.
Right.
That's just my opinion as a fan.
Yeah. I would just take it that it does sound like that William Shatner's probably done with Kirk, and I wouldn't blame him. He is, as you said, he's getting older, on in years, and it would make sense. But when I look at the legacy that William Shatner's had in terms of Star Trek and Kirk and his career as a whole, he's still got an awful lot to be proud of, I think, too.
He's
so
the original. Absolutely.
Yeah.
He set the tone. He set the bar. He's my favorite captain. He's my favorite Star Trek captain. TOS is my favorite Star Trek. I have no problem saying that to anybody who asks, or even if they don't. So I mean, the legacy, of course, is there. I just, for one, kind of wish that we could somehow address the problems of Generations, but that apparently will not happen.
Well, but then I turn around and I look at it, and I look at how they're addressing the problems of Nemesis and Picard, and I wouldn't, even if the opportunity existed, I don't know if they would do any better job or better justice for Kirk.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in our Picard review, and there's a lot of people that feel that way, which is kind of like, what? Kind of not necessarily good to be involved in new Trek right now. That's
I don't see it's not necessarily. Yeah, it's not necessarily a good thing. Maybe Generations, we should just leave that dog lie. So it's kind of where I'm coming from. So
I can see that.
At least, yeah.
I can totally see that.
So are we good to move on into streaming wars?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I actually have a story here. I figured we could just start off with a story. So in the streaming wars segment, for those of you who may be new, we talk about all the interesting things happening in the worlds of streaming video and the various services such as Disney Plus, DC Universe, Netflix, Apple, whoever. This is a story I found. I thought it was interesting. I thought I would lead off with this. This is my one, and I had another one, but I feel like it's going to be picking on DC too much, so we're going to let this be my only Streaming Wars story for tonight. So it says this comes from Screen Rant. This is by Kara Hadash. Probably pronouncing it incorrectly. Apologies right now. But it says, Disney Plus is failing to deliver on its promise. The Walt Disney Company hoped to change the streaming service game with the launch of Disney Plus, but they have yet to deliver on the high expectations. This obviously sounds like an editorial piece by the writer commenting on how she feels about what's happening. So it says, the Walt Disney Company vowed to change the streaming service game with the launch of Disney Plus, but so far, they've yet to deliver on the promises. Aside from Disney's own back catalog, the programming stems from studios such as Disney Animation, Pixar, Lucasfilm, Marvel Studios, National Geographic, 20th Century Fox, now just 20th Century, and others. But original content is what keeps subscribers interested. And that's something that Disney Plus is seriously lacking. Disney Plus launched in November of 2019 with over 7,000 TV episodes and 500 movie titles available from the start. That might sound impressive, but the vast majority is aimed at young viewers, as the company is focusing on family-oriented entertainment option. Despite the targeted demographic, Disney Plus is looking to compete with streaming heavy hitters such as Netflix and Amazon Prime, as well as upcoming services like HBO Max. Every streaming service to date has experienced growing pains, and Disney Plus is no different. Even with the criticisms, they set the bar very high with The Mandalorian, service's first scripted Star Wars series. But since then, subscribers have found themselves trying to scrounge up reasons to keep their subscription. New content is still very much a concern for the newcomer, but so is the kind of content featured on the service. Disney Plus wants to keep up with the family-friendly image, but so far, they're struggling with identity and how to present it to viewers without mixed messages. Again, if you want to continue reading this story, you could obviously go over to ScreenRant.com. This is Disney Plus is failing to deliver on its promises. I thought this was interesting. Tell me, Eric, what was your reaction, or what is your reaction right now hearing this interesting story on Screen Rant about Disney Plus failing?
This is some great insight here. This is a lot of my own feelings about Disney, and we've addressed this. We've talked about this gap right now as we're waiting for either one of the first Marvel series to come out, or for the second season of Mandalorian. At this point, there is this huge content gap going on right now as far as new content on Disney Plus. I myself, I'm not currently subscribed to Disney Plus. Now, there is an out for this, and I think Disney needs to promote this more, and that is the Disney Bundle. Now, I've talked about the Disney Bundle before because I was doing it. Now, ESPN Plus is garbage. Okay, it's complete garbage. They really need to work on that. They need to fix ESPN Plus, and then they can have a really awesome combination with Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and Hulu. I am probably going to go get my bundle back, not for Disney Plus, but for Hulu, because there is a lot of good content on Hulu. And the idea is that basically the family-friendly content is going to go on Disney. As that brand has always been the family-friendly brand. The adult stuff's going to go on Hulu. You know, that's the plan. That's the plan going forward. Orville's going to be on Hulu. You know, so that's the path forward. If they can also add some cool live sports on ESPN Plus, they could win the streaming wars almost easily, because nobody else. So I think with their current state, there's a little confusion going on. They're not. I don't know. I think like their marketing department is off right now. They really should be promoting that bundle. It shouldn't just be about Disney Plus. Promote that bundle with Hulu and fix ESPN Plus so it's not a big freaking ripoff. Get some live sports on there, and then you're going to have an advantage over everybody else. Because that combo could be the knockout punch for every other streaming provider.
Interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I did think that we have talked about that there's a huge gap. There's a lot of amazing stuff in the pipeline or stuff that's currently being developed. I'm very excited for the Moon Knight series. I've talked about that. I'm very excited for that. But we still have seen very little even from series that are theoretically close to hopefully being ready to come out. You know, when you talk about Falcon and Winter Soldier, WandaVision.
And we haven't really been able to talk about it, but Obi-Wan's been postponed.
Yeah.
It looks like the is it Castor Andor, the character?
Yeah, Cassian Andor. Yeah.
That looks like that's been postponed. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, there's a disconnect right now with their original content, and this timetable that they're doing is kind of silly. And they should have really had their act together better in terms of getting this content in a timely manner. So there's always something new, you know what I mean, that you can go to, because the legacy content is big, but that's not really what keeps people there. People are going to watch some of the old movies and watch Cinderella, you know, once or twice, and then they're done. And they're looking for something new. And like I said, the Disney Plus bundle could just be like a complete knockout punch if they actually implemented it correctly. Disney, all the family-friendly stuff. Hulu, you can put your more adult stuff and get some real good live sports on ESPN Plus. And you will have a winning combination there. But like I said, ESPN Plus is garbage right now. It is like false advertising. It is so bad.
Interesting. And we talked earlier about the story about Bob Iger stepping down, and he had talked about that it was going to free him up to focus on other things. And I wouldn't be surprised if
that's what he said. And now you kind of see Bob Iger's no idiot. Okay, because I think he knows where the problem is. He knows where the problem is. That's why he's focusing on creative.
Yeah. And this Disney Plus, at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a huge part of his legacy as being the head of Disney. Because the launch of this service is going to eclipse all the other, great acquisitions they've made, whether you want to talk about Star Wars or Marvel or whatever. If Disney Plus doesn't work out the way that it theoretically probably should, that's going to be sort of like a bit of a blight on his legacy at Disney in general. So I just thought it was interesting, reading this story and thinking about the story we were talking about with Bob Iger on a previous episode and how these kind of go together. So,
no, they do. They absolutely do. And I think he sees the problem. I really do. And I think the problem has been created in large part by Kathleen Kennedy. So,
yeah. So that's the only story, because my other one I feel like would be too mean. We'd be picking on DC too much tonight. So I'm gonna let that one slide. Maybe we'll address that on the next episode if it's still rearing its ugly head. But this is gonna be it for me tonight for Streaming Wars. Do you have anything for a Streaming Wars segment?
Yes. Here's the one that I think is more. This is more kind of like, I guess, hard news, if you will. So it says Barry Diller. This is from NBC. Barry Diller weighs in on the Hollywood streaming wars, and this is talking about Quibi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's Quibi, and I don't know a lot about that particular service. And it says Quibi is a total speculation, quote unquote, and Apple, quote, hasn't decided yet about Apple TV Plus. Barry Diller is considered a Hollywood mogul. For people that don't know, he was the head of Paramount at one time. So it says here, Barry Diller, the Hollywood mogul who once employed Jeffrey Katzenberg as his assistant, says he is neither bearish nor bullish about Quibi, the new short-form streaming service Katzenberg plans to launch next month. This is another service that's going to be coming out. Instead, Diller says he admires the bet because it's a total speculation. It's a giant and gutsy speculation, Diller, the chairman of IAC, said in an interview with NBC News Buyers Market podcast. Most people, when they hear when they hear it, aren't overwhelmed by the idea, which makes it all the gutsier. Quibi's fate is a topic du jour in an industry that has become obsessed with the rise of streaming services like Apple Plus, HBO Max, and NBC Universal's Peacock. Unlike the others, Quibi will be mobile only and will feature premium short-form content. It's not clear yet that there's any real demand for such a service. Now, what I hear here is I feel like Quibi is going to try to compete directly with YouTube. We had a previous article where we talked about YouTube is actually the dominant player in the mobile streaming wars, if you will, and on that front. And it looks like they're looking to do premium content to compete directly with YouTube, which I think YouTube's probably in a great position to totally clean their clock if they get their act together and start supporting their independent creators better and stop just being, a corporate funnel, It says Diller, who has served as chairman and CEO of Paramount, Fox, and USA Networks in a career spanning nearly 6 decades, admires Cannonberg's hustle. Says, whatever happens, he's so naked out there with this, Diller said. He's just standing there waiting for the ride to either come towards him or leave him naked on the beach. I'm sorry, that's the tide of the ride. This is hope, this great hope that somewhere in Quibi's library, there's going to be a giant hit that in there is going to be something that makes people say, oh my God, I've got to see it. And of course, content is king. He knows that. Content is king. If they have something in there that people really like, the people will come. NBC mentions their bias in this because they are going to be producing a newscast on Quibi. And it's kind of interesting. So this article, if you want to read it, kind of gets into this sort of an insider's take on all this stuff that's going on. I just thought it was interesting because we did talk previously about YouTube and how how nobody even comes close to them when it comes to mobile streaming. And this particular service is taking like a bullseye target on YouTube and going after them with quote unquote premium content.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. And but at the same point too, I mean, even if it is quote unquote premium content, YouTube has got such a head start. If they can just get their act together, they're in such a strong position. I mean, they could jack it up, but I don't think there's too far they have to go to reinforce their position and, basically be the long tail play, you know what I mean? The one that outlasts everyone else, which is ironic because I remember when I first heard about what YouTube was supposed to be, all I could think of is like, how is that even going to work? But here they are, the dominant force specifically in mobile. And it makes sense. I probably watch things on YouTube on my phone more than just about anything else. So
yeah, it's the same with me. I actually don't really like watching things on my phone, but in terms of stuff that I do watch on my phone, it's almost exclusively YouTube. So I don't like watching longer form programs on my phone. Just don't like it. I like to watch on my big screen. Diller also talked a little bit about Apple, and he said Apple is not in it with both feet. He said the iPhone makers foray into Hollywood. It says they've put some capital in, but relatively little. They're not making a major effort. They haven't decided yet. That's an interesting insight from him. I would argue that I've always argued that Apple's going to have the long-term view and just try to outlast everybody and just trying to survive to the end because they can take the biggest hit. They have the most capital. He said he also questioned the long-term viability of AT&T's HBO Max. He says, I don't think they're going to go out of business, he said, but HBO should have been out there from the beginning competing with Netflix. But the management at Time Warner said, just give us the profits. It wasn't much interested in what HBO's destiny could or should be. And I think he's right here. I think Time Warner has made some really questionable decisions as far as hanging back as long as they've had, and just basically he's arguing being content with that licensing money from Netflix, that kind of a thing. Which, you know, for Disney's credit, Bob Iger's credit, they basically said, you know what, we're gonna wean ourselves off of that. We're not gonna just take Netflix money, and we're gonna do our own thing, you know. And they got out way ahead of HBO Max. So it's going to be, I think, a legitimate question whether HBO Max can make up for that, for the fact that they are so far behind everybody else.
Yeah. I think a lot of what he's saying kind of syncs up with a lot of things that we've kind of thought or expressed, you know, on the show to one extent or another. So interesting. Cool. Do you have anything else for Streaming Wars tonight, or?
No, that's good.
It? Okay, cool. All right. So are you ready to move on to our main topic?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. All right. I guess I will go ahead and go first if that's okay. If you wouldn't mind sharing my screen. I was debating on which one to start with, and I just decided to go with this one. So our main topic for tonight's episode, or our second topic for tonight's episode, is we're talking about favorite comic books from yesteryear. This is a fun topic that I enjoy revisiting. I know from our listener survey that people are hoping to see some more fun comic book based content on the show, and this is obviously a direct response to that. Plus, also, I enjoy talking about this kind of content anyway. I know Eric does as well, so this is kind of a fun thing. So I'm going to start off here with the, I'd call it the black sheep of these favorite comics from yesteryear, but it's actually a kangaroo, amazingly enough. So we're starting off, I'm going to be talking about Lee Mar's Preteen Dirty Jean Kung Fu Kangaroos, #1. This was published in August of 1986. This is from Blackthorn Publishing. Just a little bit of background here about Lee Mars. She was born in September of 1945, is an American cartoonist and animator, and one of the first female underground comics creators. That's right. This was created by a female creator, and this is one of my favorite comics. She is best known for her comic book series, The Further Fattening Adventures of Pudge, Girl Blimp, which lasted from 1973 to 1977. And as I stated, she is an important figure in the underground comics movement. I have always loved this silly comic book. Obviously, it's a spoof. It's in response to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It very boldly states on the cover that in addition to the adventures of the Kung Fu Kangaroos, you're also going to get an extraordinarily short, critical appearance of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by none other than one of their original creators, Peter Laird. If you want to know what that is, you're going to have to find a copy of this and read it, because I don't want to spoil it. But this is a very fun, expressive, obviously comic strip cartoony kind of approach to the style. It's a lot of fun. You can see how it's kind of different because it says Kung Fu Kangaroos and they're using guns. It's really wild and outlandish, but it's a lot of fun. This is obviously a first issue, so you get the usual setup. You know, they get their powers or they get their skills and they go out and they have like a wild, rollicking adventure. I've always enjoyed this comic quite a bit. So tell me, Eric, have you ever heard of the Preteen Dirty Jean Kung Fu Kangaroos?
I can't say that I have. I have not heard of this book at all before.
This is one I often talk to when I'm talking to people because I'm a huge fan of independent comics. When I was in my very formative years when I was younger, the black and white explosion of the 80s was rampant. And we have so many things that came out of the black and white explosion. And by black and white, I'm talking about the interior pages of this are only printed in black and white. There's no color. It was a very affordable way to produce a comic in those days. Bushy Tales, when my first creator was actually my second creator on series, was also done black and white. And I'm a huge fan of a lot of this material. During the black and white explosion of the 80s, you not only had things like the Kung Fu Kangaroos here, but a lot of really important properties emerged. whether you're talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, whether you're talking about Rocketeer, whether you're talking about Men in Black. There's a lot of important content. The Crow, for example, by James O'Barr. A lot of important titles emerged during this period. And I've always had a fondness for a lot of these books, things like this. I've mentioned before, things like Adventures, the Warriors series, a lot of fun comics from this time period. So if this interests you at all, if you like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if you'd like to read one of the interesting sort of sideline things that TMNT inspired, but caught on with a very small niche group, but probably didn't catch on enough to have its own animated series or toy line, I definitely recommend running down a copy of Preteen Dirty Jean Kung Fu Kangaroos. If you keep an eye out for it, this is probably something you might find in a 50-cent bin or a $1 box somewhere. But it's a fun read and an interesting artifact from the black and white explosion that happened in the comic industry in the 1980s.
Yeah, I have to say, it was an interesting time. This is all obviously in the wake of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I mean, there was just a huge glut of independent books. And I think it was probably a very interesting time to be an independent creator back then, because there were some other interesting hits and things like that even still endure, in one form or another to this day. But there was also a lot of stuff that's completely forgotten, and it did basically cause a crash for the comic book industry,
right?
Because a lot of stores ended up with a huge number of books they couldn't sell. So it's an interesting time. It's an interesting time period just in comic book history, when you had all these black and white comics coming out. I actually have a pretty substantial collection of independent comics, especially since for the days that I used to go to San Diego Comic-Con. So I have some very obscure titles that probably had a very, very limited circulation and things like that, because that was one of the few places where you could find a lot of this content after the crash,
Right.
So it's an interesting time period. It seems to me like this is almost like a time capsule in a lot of ways, because I don't know how a book like this would be received today in the industry,
Yeah, I don't either. And there's weird too, because there's a lot of titles that people don't really associate or think of, or sometimes even remember, like you were mentioning, like Fish Police at one time. Steve Mancuse's Fish Police was so popular at one time that they actually produced an animated series that had John Ritter actually provide one of the voices. I never hear anyone talking about Fish Police anymore, and a lot of people were betting that Fish Police could actually break big. And then you have a lot of weird oddball titles, like, for example, something like Men in Black. The rights for it were snatched up right away, but no one really thought that Men in Black was going to become much of anything. And then it spawned, like a film franchise of 4 films, and at one point was very popular. It had a long-running animated series as well, and it has a lot of diehard fans that still quite love that particular franchise. So it's interesting, the things that click with people, the things that don't. But the 80s was definitely a very, very interesting time. This will not be the first time as we continue to move forward doing the show and hopefully revisit favorite comics from yesteryears. I'm going to be bringing more of these kind of interesting titles to light and talking about these fun, interesting diversions. So, cool. All right. So if you want, we'll move on to your pick, if that'll work.
So for a little bit of background, back with the days of the audio show, we were going to do a spinner rack special where we were going to talk about books that we got off of the rack, not at a comic book store necessarily, that we came across in our childhood. And unfortunately, when we did that episode, I didn't have access to my childhood comic books. I didn't know where they were. And I realized later that they were at my parents' house. The books that I have here, where I live, they're more modern books. They're not the stuff from the 80s and things like that when I was a kid. So kind of to make up for that, that's why I came up with this. This is probably the only issue of Thor that I actually physically own. I don't know if I have any other issues of Thor. And as I like to always say, The funny thing about me with comics is that, I didn't grow up reading a lot of superhero comics other than what was in my brother's collection, which was mostly Captain Marvel, Shazam, Captain Marvel, and Superman. He had quite a few books. He still has them. And I read a lot of them as a kid, but the stuff that I bought was usually G.I. Joe or Transformers. But the funny thing about this is, and the funny thing about the spinner rack and the spinner rack experience, which is basically dead now, it doesn't exist. And I think it's a shame, because that's why I picked this up, is because there was no G.I. Joe or Transformers that day that I went into Circle K to get my comics and some candy and all that kind of stuff, as I did quite often growing up as a kid with my dad. And so I got this, because I've heard of Thor before. It's funny because Thor wasn't all that prominent as far as animation at the time. I believe he did make some appearances either in the Hulk cartoon or the Spider-Man cartoon. I think he was featured at least once or twice. So I knew who the character was. I kind of knew who he was visually. What's interesting about this particular issue is you can kind of see his look is a little bit different. He's got a lot more like armor than kind of what you see in terms of the more, I guess, traditional look that we've kind of gone back to with the MCU. In this one, you can see he's got like basically almost like a full suit of armor with chainmail and all that kind of stuff. And it was just kind of an interesting look. But the thing that I remember the most about this book is basically the last image. So to kind of sum up the story, Thor is basically trying to defend this planet that's being attacked by the Celestials, and it's very much considered like an uneven match, because Thor, even though he's a god, he's not a Celestial, and the Celestials are like the ultimate, and Thor it's looking like Thor is probably could lose, that he's not going to be able to take on this this Celestial, that it's too much for him to handle. One thing I really like is the dialogue in this book. It's so like kind of classic Thor type dialogue. There's a lot of vouts and a lot of that kind of sort of
Right.
like a older style way of speaking that I really kind of like. Gives Thor sort of that class that he is the god of thunder. It's not really more like the comedic take that we see in the MCU.
Right.
I remember watching the first Thor movie, and I actually was surprised how much I enjoyed it. But I feel like in a lot of ways, the characters become a big joke in the MCU as the movies have progressed. The last Thor movie, Ragnarok, is listed as a comedy. It's actually listed as a comedy if you look at the genre. So this is a much more serious version of Thor. This is a very dramatic story where, like I said, Thor is basically doing his job. He has pledged to protect this planet. He knows the odds are against him. There's a very high likelihood he's going to die, and he decides to take on the Celestial anyway. It's really like classic superhero, which we don't see anymore. We don't see the classic superhero that's actually trying to protect the people. You know what I mean? That's one of the things with a lot of this stuff that gets to me, is that a lot of times you don't see that side of it anymore. But Thor is basically going all out, and it's kind of funny because the natives of the planet, they're kind of dominated by this pirate character, who's basically just all he cares about is saving his own butt and getting away, and he ends up essentially sacrificing his entire fleet just so he can try to escape on his own. Meanwhile, Thor is just locked in this complete life and death struggle, fighting against all odds. And eventually what he does that's really interesting in this book is eventually what he does is he actually is able to take his life essence and he's able to focus it into his hammer. He takes his life essence and he's able to focus that into the hammer to do like one super blow to the Celestial's brain, essentially, to actually impact it and possibly do some real damage and take the Celestial out. And the sort of the final image in this book, it's really, really dramatic. He's focused all of his power essentially in this one blow, and it destroys the hammer. The hammer actually is destroyed. He actually destroys the hammer, but he makes the hole in what you could look at as like the Celestial's brain. And he's made the hole. And the next thing you see, there had been this sort of minion that Thor had taken out before that was sort of like, you could think of him as like an antibody for the Celestial. And it like takes everything Thor has to beat this guy. And then, he does this blow. And the last image you see is Thor with the broken hammer. All that's left is the handle. And now there's like an army of these guys coming at him. And he's all like, busted up and everything like that. And he's just like, all right, come and get some, kind of thing. And it's a really neat image. And I remember that was the thing that always really struck me about it was seeing the hammer destroyed and all that. That's the first time I ever had seen that. And I thought it was just incredibly intense and crazy and all that kind of stuff. And Thor's just general attitude of there was no way he was going to give up. There's no way he's going to surrender. He's a true superhero. He is a god. He's going to go to, he basically says, hey, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die fighting. You know what I mean? I'm right. Going down. I'm taking as many of you with me as I can, that kind of attitude. So it's a neat story. And I think the image of him with the broken hammer, I think looms large, and it was even kind of used when they destroyed the hammer in the MCU. I think some of that is there. Have some images here. This particular book, by the way, I mean, it came out in 1988, so it's on newsprint. So if I like just show you the book, it's probably going to be very hard to see. But there's some images here that you can see from the book. Some really interesting, cool art and all that kind of stuff that really really stands up today, very much so, I think. It's just overall, I think it's a really interesting book. And like I said, I think it's the only Thor comic that I have in my comic collection. And I wouldn't have got it if it hadn't been for the old spinner racks and the fact that they just didn't have any G.I. Joe or Transformers that day.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of titles a lot of us bought off that spinner rack because they didn't have something we were looking for. I mentioned in a previous episode, I talked about that Jonah Hex issue, and I bought that because they told me, oh, they finally got a Batman comic in, and I ran over, was so excited, and I pulled out the spinner rack, and I was like, this is a Batman, But there's a lot of fun to be had too. You're always discovering something you weren't terribly familiar with, and a lot of times it ended up being something that you really enjoyed. So that's kind of fun too. And I think in terms of the storyline, I think Thor's body had been almost crippled or something, and they made that armor to kind of help him stay constituted in order to basically still be Thor. Because I think the armor is enchanted, if I remember correctly. But no, yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Exactly. Yeah. The armor's essentially destroyed in this issue too. He's practically naked by the end of this this issue. So
interesting. Cool. Well, if you don't mind, I think we'll go ahead and we'll move on to my last one for tonight, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Okay, so here is this is my my second pick, and this will be the last one for the evening. This is Marvel Superheroes number 75. This features the Incredible Hulk, as you can see from the artwork that's being displayed on your screen. If you are listening to the show, it's the Incredible Hulk, and he is punching the leader, the Hulk villain with the weird giant head, kind of a mad scientist kind of a character. He's punching him and knocking him out of a weird three-legged machine, not too different from something you would have seen like in the old War of the Worlds. I do have a couple notes here I put together. So this is Marvel Superheroes 75. Obviously, this was published by Marvel Comics in October of 1978. This comic, this is actually a replacement of my original one that was destroyed because I read it so much it fell apart. The original one came into my possession by actually trading comics and baseball cards when I was a kid in elementary school. And then this actually is a replacement copy that I found many, many years later and was happy to add back into my collection. This story actually reprints a story that was previously published in Hulk number 123. The writer is the legendary Roy Thomas. The art is by Herb Trimpe. And I've got a couple notes here just to read about them. So Roy Thomas was an American comic book writer, or is, and because he is still alive, is an American comic book writer and editor who was Stan Lee's first successor as editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. He is possibly best known for introducing the pulp magazine hero Conan the Barbarian to American comics, with a series that added to the storyline of Robert E. Howard's character and helped launch a sword and sorcery trend in comics. Thomas is also known for championing the Golden Age comic book heroes, particularly the 1940s superhero team, the Justice Society of America, and for lengthy writing stints on Marvel's X-Men, the Avengers, and DC Comics All-Star Squadron, among many other titles. Among the comic book creators he co-created are Wolverine, Vision, Carol Danvers, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Ultron, Man-Thing, Red Sonja, Ghost Rider, Red Guardian, Brother Voodoo, and the Valkyrie. Thomas was inducted into the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame in 2011. So as you can tell, a very distinguished and illustrious, legendary writer wrote this comic book that had quite an influence on a very young version of me. The artist is Herb Trimpe. I've always quite liked Herb Trimpe's art. He is an American comic artist and occasional writer. He's best known as the seminal 1970s artist on The Incredible Hulk. He is my Incredible Hulk artist. And as the first artist to draw for publication the character Wolverine. He would later become a breakout star in the X-Men. The legacy of this book for me, it looms pretty large. When I think of the Incredible Hulk fighting a villain, I always think of him fighting the leader. I don't really think of him fighting Abomination or any of the villains that people typically think of. It's always a brain versus brawn, a character with a mental ability versus a character, obviously driven by, passion and rage and brute force. This is a very fun comic. It's a classic, mind versus muscle kind of a story. The basic gist of it starts off that the Fantastic Four have managed to capture the Incredible Hulk. Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, Fantastic Four, in conjunction with some notes that he's gathered from Bruce Banner, they think they've found a cure. So they attempt to activate the cure. And what it does is it enables Bruce Banner to actually be able to control his transformations, and he actually maintains a percentage of his intelligence, which is very much like what they did in Avengers Endgame. So it's kind of that version of the Incredible Hulk. Meanwhile, the leader is scheming to obviously still take over the world and pay back the Incredible Hulk for what he's done to him. And the army has this mechanized device that they've invented. The leader wants it because they can use it to achieve his ends. Along the same lines, there's a subplot where General Thunderbolt Ross and Bruce Banner kind of bury their differences for a little bit, realizing they need to come together over this particular device. The leader managed to steal the device. He actually tries to use it on the Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk eventually obviously wins out the day. I'm not going to give you the particulars because you should track down a copy of this issue and read it. It's a classic, old school, good guy versus bad guy kind of story. But a lot of fun, just classic, old school comics, kind of stuff that I've always loved. So this was my last pick for our favorite comics of yesteryear. So tell me, Eric, had you ever come across this particular issue of the Marvel Superheroes, The Incredible Hulk?
No, I can't say that I did, but I really like the cover. The cover art is really cool. I like that. And I do remember the leader from the Incredible Hulk cartoon in the 80s. And then also, of course, there was a sort of teaser that we were going to see the leader later after the last Hulk solo or Hulk movie. But I guess they decided not to proceed with that. That was after they decided to recast the Hulk. I would like to have seen that. It would be neat to see a live action version of the leader. But I haven't read this particular book, but I do really dig that cover. That's a pretty cool cover.
It's fun. It's to me, when I think of comics, I think of two things. I think of the really fun independent black and white explosion books. Most of them had painted covers and black and white interiors. And then when I think of Marvel and DC, I think of these classic 4-color adventure stories. They're there's always that melodrama, that underlying story that's moving like a long form narrative forward. But at the same point, you just, in every single issue, you always have the hero villain confrontation or battle. And I've always loved this particular issue because I feel like it epitomizes that idea in a lot of different ways. But this is a comic you don't hear a lot of people talk about. Obviously, it's a reprint of a Hulk story, number one. But number two, this was my introduction to this story. The next, I was familiar with the Incredible Hulk from the television series. And then I saw this comic being passed around, and I really wanted to read it because I liked the cover, but also number two, because this is something you would never see on the television series. That's why it piqued my interest. I was like, oh, who is he fighting? Like, this looks really interesting. And so I picked this up and then I read it, fell in love with it. And then basically several years later, I would run across the Batman versus the Incredible Hulk. The leader actually makes a brief cameo in that as sort of like a manifestation of the Incredible Hulk's illusion that the Shaper of Worlds is causing to come upon him and in order to control him mentally. But it's just a great classic, just adventure story. One of the reasons I love the Incredible Hulk, and a big reason for why I've always liked the character of the leader. So it's just another fun comic.
Is this particular issue a complete story? Like the Thor issue I have it's a cliffhanger, so you don't really get a resolution to the story. Does this one actually resolve the story, or is it also a cliffhanger?
No, I mean, it has a cliffhanger for the Incredible Hulk. I mean, every comic ideally would have a cliffhanger, so you're going to really come back. But no, this initial story between the Incredible Hulk and the leader, it does have a resolution. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It sets up a premise, and then it plays it through to the end. But it leaves Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk in an interesting sort of situation, questioning, what it means for the these different aspects of Bruce Banner or Bruce Banner and the Hulk, if you want to see them as separate entities. It leaves them with a bit of a dilemma. It is a bit of a cliffhanger, but the story with the leader is definitely resolved. I mean, he kind of gets away, but then that's kind of how these stories always used to go. The villain always got away. I think back to how much I loved the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, and one of the things I loved about it was that when the Green Goblin is flying away, when he's menacing them at the street fair or whatever it is, he says, we'll meet again, Spider-Man, or I'll get you, the kind of thing. And I love that because it's so classic, comic book cartoon Spider-Man, the villain making that kind of observation as he's managing to get away, but he'll be back. I just love that kind of stuff. I mean, maybe it's a little dated, a little too quaint for today's modern audiences, but I think this stuff is still a lot of fun. And if you're curious to see the kind of interesting stories that entertained a whole generation of kids, here you go. Here's an interesting one. I think that you could definitely sample. It's not going to set you back a lot. It's not a terribly expensive issue. You're going to find it in a quarter or a 50-cent box or $1 box or whatever. But it's a fun comic to add to your collection and an interesting read, in my opinion.
Very cool. Very cool.
Awesome. Well, that's going to be it for me. Do we have anything else for this particular episode?
No, I don't think so. I think we can kind of go with the outro.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. So I want to thank you for hopefully watching or listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. We hope that you've enjoyed this particular episode. And hopefully you'll check out some of these interesting old school comic book recommendations. I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. If you're curious to learn more about me, see more of my artwork. If you're curious about anything about me, you can learn an awful lot about me, probably more than you really honestly should know, at my website. That's at davebeaty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. All kinds of fun stuff to be found there. I want to thank my co-host, Mr. Eric Alexander, for once again, obviously being back on the show, providing his unique insight and providing all these interesting things for us to talk about when it comes to pop culture and the streaming wars. Please, Eric, tell our wonderful viewers or listeners where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
I'm most active on Twitter. You can find me there at BassGod14, BassGod14. That is also my YouTube channel, and that's also Twitch. So BassGod14.
Very cool. We'll be doing the drawing for who won the sketch card probably a little bit later. Obviously, if you're listening to the audio version of this show on a later date, obviously the contest ends when the episode is obviously over. Just a couple of quick disclaimers on that contest too, I forgot to mention earlier. Number one, please be above the age of 18 and shipping in the United States only, please. And as we like to do, we always like to have our commenters have the last word. I'm actually going to pick up Ronnie Shink's last comment and just take a moment to think upon the career and the impact that Scott Clark, who was a dear friend of mine and a great comic book artist, someone that you should definitely look into. If you're curious about Scott's work, you could check into Spawn versus Wildcats. A lot of people very fondly remember him for that. You could look into Brightest Day from DC Comics or even the Grifter series. A lot of tremendous work that Scott basically created for all of us to enjoy that still lives on. His legacy in the comic industry, in my mind anyway, looms pretty large. So I definitely recommend that you maybe do a Google search, find something interesting, and look into the work of Scott Clark. But as Ronnie said, yeah, he's truly missed.
And with that, we'll leave our viewers with the last word.